Hello everyone, I am here to help you today. I know you used this video to fall asleep, so before that, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where are you from and what time are you watching? Now get comfortable and relax. I was alone in the office that night and it was close to midnight. My desk lamp lit a small circle on my cluttered tabletop, and the rest of the open plan room felt darker than usual. I leaned back in my chair and tried to stretch out the stiffness in my shoulders. My computer fan hummed and I heard the steady buzz of the overhead fluorescent lights. I'd been here late many times before handling paperwork and last-minute emails, but that night felt different, right? From the start the air felt heavier and every small sound made me jump a little. I kept glancing at the big windows that faced the empty street, checking for passing cars or any sign of life out there. Nothing moved, and every time I looked I felt more and more uneasy. Around 11:30 I decided to get some coffee from the break room. The place was at the far end of the hall, and I remember the corridor lights flickered a bit as I walked. My footsteps echoed and I noticed the echo was louder than usual. I could hear my own breathing. The building was absolutely silent. I wondered if any security guard was around, but usually they made rounds earlier and left me to lock up. The coffee tasted stale, but I drank it anyway, hoping the bitterness would keep me awake for another hour or two. When I got back to my desk, I tried to concentrate on the spreadsheets on my screen. I typed a few lines of data, but I felt restless. My eyes kept shifting to the clock in the lower right corner of my monitor. The minute hand inched closer to midnight. The office felt colder than normal, and the small space heater under my desk did nothing to help. I rubbed my hand together to warm them up. At some point I stood to walk around the office for a moment just to shake off the tension. I went by a few empty cubicles and paused at the large window near the entrance. The city lights in the distance looked far away and I felt strange for being up there working so late by myself. Then, without warning, the phone on my desk rang. The sound was abrupt and jarring. In the quiet space I froze for a moment, confused because I knew that phone wasn't even connected to a phone line. We had a few old desk phones scattered around, but management had switched everything to cell phones and a separate internet-based system. The old phone sat there mostly as a leftover from years ago. I stared at the handset and it rang again. It was a harsh metallic tone that echoed around the empty room. My heart pounded and I felt my palms get sweaty. I walked slowly back to my desk, my footsteps sounding heavy against the carpet. Part of me wanted to ignore the ringing. Part of me was too curious to let it go. I picked up the receiver. I lifted it to my ear. At first I heard nothing but static. Then I heard heavy breathing, like someone was standing right next to me, breathing into my ear. There were no words, just this slow, uneven breathing sound. My throat felt tight and I tried to speak, but nothing came out. Then there was a sudden click, like the line had been cut. The phone went silent. I held the receiver for a few more seconds, trying to figure out what had just happened. My pulse raced and I felt a chill on the back of my neck. I put the phone down gently. It felt like the plastic might slip out of my hand because my fingers were trembling. I looked around the office, half expecting to see someone lurking behind a cubicle wall. Nothing. The fluorescent lights buzzed. My desk lamp glowed weakly and the phone sat there as if nothing had happened. I told myself it was some kind of glitch or maybe a prank call, but how could there be a prank call on a disconnected phone? The thought made my chest feel tight. I checked the phone cord. It was plugged into the wall, but the line on that wall panel wasn't active. We had cancelled those lines a year ago. I tried to calm myself by opening my laptop's browser and searching for any signs of an outage or phone line mix-up in the building. My internet worked fine, but there was no explanation for that call. I considered calling one of my co-workers, but it was almost midnight, nobody was awake. I didn't want to look foolish by telling them I got a call on a deadline. I stood up and walked around again, checking each cubicle in the hallway. I kept looking over my shoulder, thinking I might catch a glimpse of someone turning a corner. I felt like I was being watched. My stomach was in knots and I kept swallowing hard. The break room was empty and the coffee pot was still on the warmer. An inch of old coffee sat there looking thick and dark. The fridge buzzed quietly. I opened it to see if anyone else had stored something, but there was nothing but a few leftover lunches from earlier in the week. I decided to investigate the server room. Sometimes the phone or internet lines run through there, and I wondered if maybe something had been reconnected. The server room was behind a locked door, but I had the key card. I slid it through the reader and stepped inside. The air felt colder because of the cooling system that keeps the servers from overheating. The machines hummed and the floor vibrated with a subtle rhythm. I checked the main panel that handled the old telephone lines, but everything looked unused. The cables were neatly coiled and the breaker for those lines was in the off position. I stood there for a while just staring at that board, not sure what to think. Suddenly I heard a thump in the hallway. It was a soft sound like someone had knocked into a chair or a wall. My pulse sped up again and I felt my hand shake. I quickly turned off the server room light and shut the door behind me. I stayed in the dark for a moment listening. I heard a faint clicking sound like a pen tapping on a desk. My heart hammered and I tried to stay quiet, but my breathing was loud. I felt like I couldn't get enough air. I peeked around the corner and saw the hallway empty. The overhead lights were still on. The hum of the ventilation system drowned out smaller sounds. I forced myself to walk slowly back to my desk, trying to maintain some composure. I felt the hair on my arms stand on end like the air was charged with static. My phone was where I'd left it, silent and harmless. I stared at it for a long moment, waiting for it to ring again. It didn't. I grabbed my jacket from the back of my chair. My first instinct was to leave right away, but I had deadlines and I'd stayed late for a reason. I thought maybe it was better to just finish my work and get out of there. I sat down, saved my spreadsheets and tried to focus on the last few items on my list. My eyes kept darting to the phone. The office was too quiet and every small sound made me jump. I wanted to blast some music, but I felt like that would make it easier for someone to sneak up on me, so I just sat there in silence, typing and clicking my mouse, constantly looking around. Then a few minutes before midnight the phone rang again. The same shrill tone startled me so badly I almost fell off my chair. I stared at the phone in disbelief. The ring echoed across the empty cubicles. I picked up the receiver again. My hand was sweaty and my breathing was shallow. I said hello, but my voice came out weak. I heard the same heavy breathing on the other end. This time it was faster, like the person was excited or anxious. I said, "Who is this?" but there was no response, just that breathing. Then I heard a faint scraping sound like something being dragged across concrete. It made my teeth clench. The line crackled and I heard a low whisper, "Too quiet to understand." It could have been a word or just a breath. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, trying to catch any detail. Then there was another click. The line went dead again. I slammed the receiver down and stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. My skin felt clammy and I had goosebumps all over my arms. I scanned the office. It was still empty, but I felt certain I wasn't alone. I decided to check the stairwell. Sometimes late at night the cleaning crew left carts or equipment in there. I walked down the hallway while passing the elevator bank. The elevator doors were closed, no movement. I opened the heavy metal door to the stairwell and a rush of cool air hit me. The lights in the stairwell were dim but I could see well enough. I went down one floor listening for any noises. All I heard was my footsteps and my own breathing. No one else was there. I forced myself to climb back up, feeling frustrated and on edge. When I got back to my floor, I decided enough was enough. I started packing up my laptop and stuffing paperwork into my bag I wanted to get out, but as I powered down my computer, I heard a soft scraping noise somewhere behind me. I spun around, but there was nobody in sight. The sound was so subtle that I questioned whether I heard it at all. I waited, breathing in short, uneven bursts. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe a maintenance worker was moving something, or maybe a door was stuck. But I couldn't shake the dread that had settled in my gut. I walked to the phone again and lifted the receiver. No dial tone, just silence. I hung it up. I thought about leaving right away, but then I remembered I needed a certain file that was saved on one of the shared drives. I had to log in again to retrieve it. My hands felt stiff on the keyboard and I kept checking over my shoulder. The printer across the room clicked in Word. I jumped at the noise, my heart jumping too. The printer was just resetting itself, but I felt like it was mocking me. Finally, my file finished downloading. I stuffed my USB drive in my jacket pocket. I grabbed my bag, zipped it shut, and headed for the elevator. The hallway felt longer than usual. The elevator button glowed faintly under my finger. I heard the cables whirring and the door slid open. I stepped inside, pressed the ground floor button, and waited. The doors closed and the elevator began its slow descent. My reflection in the metal panel showed how pale I looked. I realized my shirt was sticking to my back with sweat. As the elevator approached the ground floor, I felt a vibration in my pocket. My cell phone was ringing. I quickly pulled it out, checking the caller ID. It was an unknown number. My stomach tightened and I considered not answering, but curiosity got the best of me. I swiped to pick up the call and said hello. Silence. Then I heard a single breath, like someone leaning close to a microphone. I yelled into the phone, "Stop calling me." There was no response, just a low static hum. Then the call ended abruptly. The elevator reached the ground floor and the door opened with a ding. The lobby was empty. The night security guard's desk was unoccupied. Sometimes they stepped out for a smoke, but it still felt wrong not to see anyone around. I walked across the shiny tiles, hearing my footsteps echo. I pushed on the front doors and the cold outside air hit me. I hurried to my car in the parking lot. It was dark except for a few street lights and I felt exposed. I thought I heard a faint ringing sound, but I couldn't tell if it was real or just in my head. Inside my car, I locked the doors immediately. My hands were shaking as I started the engine. I drove out of that lot faster than I intended. The roads were mostly empty and the traffic lights changed in my favor, so I made it home in record time. The entire drive I kept checking my rearview mirror, expecting to see headlights tailing me, but I was alone on the road. When I got into my apartment, I turned on every light I could. I closed the blinds, double-checked the locks, and made sure no windows were open. My heart was still pounding. I dropped my bag on the couch and sat there trying to steady my breathing. My phone was on the coffee table. I glared at it, half expecting it to ring again. It stayed silent. I felt a mixture of relief and lingering terror. I got up, grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge and chugged half of it. My throat felt dry and my mouth tasted sour from the stress. I paced around my living room for a while, checking my phone every few minutes to see if I missed another call. Nothing came in. I considered calling the police, but I didn't know what to tell them. There was no direct threat and no sign of forced entry at the office. It wasn't a typical emergency, so I stood there fiddling with my keychain and trying to calm down. My mind replayed the moment I heard that breathing on the line. I kept wondering who could have possibly been on the other end. Eventually I took a quick shower, hoping the hot water would help. My shoulders were tense and the muscles in my neck hurt. I washed my face, got into some clean clothes, and kept all the lights on in my bedroom. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening for any noise. Every click of the AC unit or hum of the refrigerator made my pulse jump. My phone stayed beside me, and each time the screen lit up from a notification, I felt a spike of panic. None of the alerts were calls, they were just emails or random app updates. I barely slept that night. The next morning I woke up groggy and still tense. I went back to the office around 10 o'clock, deciding to show up later than usual. My co-workers were there chatting and laughing like nothing was wrong. I went straight to my desk and checked the phone. It was still there, disconnected with no sign of recent activity. I felt a surge of anger and confusion. I told a coworker about the strange call, but they shrugged it off as if I was imagining things. They insisted the phone had no line. I even checked again in the server room, and everything was as I'd left it. No active cables for that phone. I spent the rest of the day feeling paranoid. Every time I walked past the phone, I expected it to ring. It didn't, but I couldn't forget the breathing, the clicks, and the feeling that someone was right behind me. Even though I finished my tasks and got out of there before sunset, the memory stuck with me for a long time. I still work in that office, but I refuse to stay past regular hours. If something urgent comes up, I'll finish it at home. I don't pick up that phone anymore. In fact, I keep it shoved under a pile of old documents, and I don't even glance at it. I'm not sure if what happened that night was a glitch or a sick joke. All I know is I never heard a phone ring in an empty building like that before, and I hope I never do again. I first saw this place on a Tuesday afternoon. It looked normal enough, a compact single-story house with faded paint on the siding and a narrow driveway leading to a small garage. I stepped out of my car and walked around the property, glancing at the windows to make sure they weren't cracked and checking the roof to see if there were any leaks. Everything seemed fine. The real estate agent told me the house had been vacant for 6 months. It didn't bother me. I just needed somewhere cheap and close to work. I signed the rental agreement on the spot. It felt like a good idea at the time. I moved in a week later. The first days were uneventful. I unpacked my boxes, set up my bed, and placed some furniture around the small living room. The kitchen was cramped and the stove looked a bit old, but it worked. The bathroom had weak water pressure, but I could live with it. The only part that bothered me was the garage. It was attached to the side of the house with a thin metal door connecting it to the kitchen. The interior of the garage was dark and narrow. The walls were dusty cinder blocks and the corners were packed with old spider webs. I saw dead bugs near the baseboards and the concrete floor was stained in patches. I figured I'd clean it out eventually, but it wasn't a priority. On my third night in the house, I woke up at around 2 a.m. feeling thirsty. I rolled out of bed, shuffled to the kitchen and drank some water. As I put the glass down, I heard a faint sound. It was like a light footstep or something scraping on concrete. At first I thought maybe a cat was outside, but it felt closer. I stood still listening. The sound came again from the garage door. It was a single thump, like someone stepping carefully on the floor and shifting their weight. I walked over to the door and pressed my ear against it. Another sound, this time like someone dragging a foot across concrete. My pulse started to race. I considered opening the door, but fear stopped me. Instead, I flipped on the kitchen light to see if anything changed. The noise stopped. I waited, heart pounding, for another sound. Nothing. My throat felt tight. I switched the light off again and stayed there for a minute, trying to sense anything. I didn't hear anything else, so I told myself it was just my imagination. I went back to bed, but I lay awake for another hour before finally drifting Off the next morning I woke up and checked the garage. I found nothing unusual. It was the same mess of webs and dusty corners. I looked around for footprints or any sign that someone had been in there. I saw no footprints, no scuff marks, and no disturbed cobwebs. Everything seemed normal. I sighed in relief and told myself it was just late night nerves. That afternoon I decided to buy a better lock for the door between the kitchen and the garage. The door had a basic door knob lock and the key was pretty flimsy. I went to the hardware store and picked up a deadbolt with a stronger mechanism. When I got back I installed it myself, making sure the frame was secure and the bolt slid smoothly. I tested it by locking and unlocking a few times. It felt solid. That night I cooked a quick dinner and tried not to think about the garage. Around 11 p.m. I double-checked all the doors and windows, then went to bed. Sometime after midnight I jolted awake again. My eyes snapped open and I stared at the ceiling, feeling uneasy. I couldn't hear anything at first. I forced myself to stay quiet and listen. Then I heard a faint rattle like metal brushing against metal. It was soft but steady, coming from the kitchen door that led to the garage. I got out of bed, bare feet on the cold floor, and crept toward the kitchen. My heart was pounding so loud I could feel it in my temples. I stood about 5 feet from the door, squinting in the darkness, trying to see if the door knob was moving. A dim strip of moonlight came through a small window, illuminating the edge of the door. I saw the knob tremble like someone was jiggling it from the other side. I froze, my hands were shaking, and I felt my breathing get shallow. I suddenly remembered the deadbolt. I had locked it from the inside. That meant no one could open the door from outside, at least not without breaking something, but the knob was definitely moving. I felt a wave of adrenaline rush through me. I wanted to flip on the kitchen light again, but I worried it might provoke whoever was there. I stood in the dark watching the knob rattle for a few more seconds, then it stopped. I stayed there waiting for something else to happen. My legs felt weak and I had the urge to run back to my bedroom and shut the door, but I forced myself to stand my ground. After a minute of silence I quietly backed away, grabbed a flashlight from a drawer and walked to my bedroom. I locked my bedroom door and sat on the bed, flashlight in hand, eyes wide open. I didn't sleep much that night. When dawn finally broke I got dressed, and went straight to the kitchen to inspect the door. The deadbolt was still engaged just like I'd left it. I unlocked it, opened the door, and stepped into the garage. My shoes crunched on some stray bits of gravel. Dust floated in the cold air. The garage smelled stale. Nothing looked disturbed aside from a fresh set of spider webs that seemed to have appeared overnight. I checked the outside garage door that led to the driveway. It was shut and the slide lock on the inside was still in place. There were no broken windows or forced openings. I was confused, but I tried to let it go. That evening I felt anxious about going to sleep, so I stayed up later watching TV with the volume low. By midnight I was exhausted, so I finally turned everything off before heading to bed. I decided I would lock the garage door from the inside once more, only this time I'd place a small piece of tape over the latch to see if it moved. That way, if someone was messing with the door, I'd know. I stuck the tape on and pressed it down firmly. Then I locked the deadbolt, jiggled the doorknob to make sure it was secure, and walked away. I didn't hear anything that night. When I woke up I immediately rushed to the kitchen to check the door. My stomach dropped when I saw the tape lying curled on the floor. The deadbolt was unlocked and the doorknob was twisted like someone had gripped it with incredible force from the inside. The metal looked warped, the edges bent inward almost as if it had been crushed. There were no dents in the door itself, no sign of forced entry, and the frame wasn't splintered. I felt sweat on my forehead. I unlocked the door, pushed it open, and looked around the garage. The garage was silent, dimly lit by the morning sun filtering through a dirty window near the ceiling. I could see my breath in the chilly air. Nothing looked different, but I noticed more spider webs had been cleared away in one corner, like someone had brushed them aside. There were tiny bits of broken web on the floor as if they'd been torn. I swallowed hard, feeling tension in my chest. My hands felt clammy, and I wiped them on my pants. I walked over to the corner and looked closer. I didn't see footprints, but there was a faint smudge in the dust, something that could have been a shoe print. It was too blurry to be certain. I backed away, checking the walls for any holes or hidden entrances. Nothing stood out, just old cinder blocks and a few cracks. The overhead light fixture didn't work, so I couldn't flip on a bright light to see better. I relied on the dull daylight. Every step I took made a slight echo. The place felt colder than usual. I needed answers. I went back into the house, got my phone, and dialed the real estate agent's number. She picked up after a few rings. I asked if there was any history of trespassers or weird break-ins. She told me she hadn't heard of any. She said she'd ask the landlord and get back to me. I thanked her, hung up, and just stood there staring at the kitchen door. I decided to buy a surveillance camera. It was the only thing that made sense. I drove to an electronics store, picked up a basic camera that recorded onto an SD card, and returned home. I installed it in the kitchen facing the door. It had night vision, so I figured it would catch anything that happened during the night. Then I replaced the twisted doorknob with a new one. I also installed another deadbolt, a different brand, just to feel safer. By the time I finished, I was covered in sweat and dust, my arms HDHD, but I felt a little calmer, hoping the camera would catch anyone trying to open the door that night. I ate a quick dinner and set up a small TV tray in the living room, placing the camera's receiver on it. It showed a live feed of the door. I could see the doorknob clearly and a portion of the garage door behind it. I left the camera rolling and made sure the SD card had enough space for several hours of recording. Then I locked everything up and tried to fall asleep at around 2 a.m. I woke up with a jolt. My heart raced, but I didn't hear anything. I checked the camera feed on the small screen next to my couch. It showed the dark kitchen silent. The doorknob wasn't moving. I stayed there for a few minutes, yawning but alert. Nothing changed. I turned off the screen and went back to bed. When I woke up in the morning, I went straight to check the feed. I fast-forwarded through the night, eyes darting across the screen. At first it was all quiet, then at around 10 a.m. I saw the doorknob start to shake. There was no one in the frame. The door just rattled on its own. Then the feed went static for a few seconds. When it cleared, the doorknob was warped just like before. The deadbolt was open. The tape on the latch was gone. I watched the rest of the footage, but there was nothing else. No intruder, no figure, no sign of how the door got unlocked. I played the static part again, hoping to catch a glimpse of something. It was just white noise for about 4 seconds. I felt a jolt of fear in my stomach. My legs felt weak. I placed the camera back on and stared at the door. It was still locked when I looked at it in real life, but the feed showed it had been unlocked. I walked over to check. Sure enough, the deadbolt was unlatched. The knob was twisted again, even though I had just installed a new one. It had the same crushed look to it. My breath caught in my throat. I pulled the door open and entered the garage one more time. It was empty, quiet. The morning sun lit up the dust floating around, and I saw more webs disturbed near the far corner. The slide lock on the outer garage door was still in place. I spent the next hour searching every inch of the garage. I knocked on the walls to see if there were hidden compartments. I examined the ceiling to check for trap doors. Nothing. It was just a plain narrow garage with dirty concrete floors. My anxiety kept building, and I felt a pressure in my chest. I left the garage, locked the door, and grabbed my car keys. I drove around the neighborhood for a while thinking about calling the police, but I wasn't sure what I'd tell them. There was no actual break-in, no damage besides the doorknob, and no person on camera. It sounded ridiculous. When I got back home, I called a locksmith. He arrived in the early afternoon, and I showed him the twisted knob and the door. He checked the frame, the new deadbolt, and the latch. He said he couldn't see any indication of a tool being used. He also said the metal looked like it had been gripped by something strong. He shrugged, replaced the knob and the deadbolt with higher grade parts, and charged me extra for the trouble. I watched him work, feeling a surge of nervous energy every time he glanced at the damaged door knob. He asked me what happened, and I just said I found it like that. He nodded and left. After he was gone, I tested the new lock and door knob multiple times. Everything worked smoothly. I placed my camera in a new angle directly across from the door so it would catch anything that happened. Then I closed the door to the garage, locked it, and sat at my kitchen table. I kept looking at the door, waiting for something to happen. In broad daylight, nothing did. Eventually I sighed and decided to go about my day, but in the back of my mind I couldn't stop thinking about those footsteps in the rattling doorknob. I'm still living in this house, and the garage is still narrow, dark, and filled with webs. I never leave my car in there. I park on the street every night. I lock the door, double-check the deadbolts, and set up the camera, and every morning I check the footage. Sometimes it's just static for a few seconds around 3 a.m., and when the picture returns, the lock is opened or the doorknob is bent. There's never anyone there. The landlord has no answers, and neither do I. I'm not sure how long I'll stay here, but for now I keep the door locked, even though it doesn't seem to matter. My heart still pounds every time I hear noise after midnight, and I can't seem to shake the feeling that something's inside that garage waiting. I stopped at that roadside hotel because I felt like my eyes were about to shut on their own. I had no patience for fancy places. I just needed a bed, a hot shower, and a lock on the door. The motel sign flickered in a sketchy way, and the parking lot looked almost deserted. I noticed a single car in one corner covered in dust, and a battered pickup truck near the entrance. The walls of the building were chipped, and the neon light outside kept buzzing. I didn't think much about it. I parked close to the reception, took a deep breath, and walked in. The guy at the front desk was an older man, probably in his late 60s. He wore a stained polo shirt and had a tired expression. He spoke with a low voice and barely looked at me. The check-in process was fast. He handed me the key and told me my room was down the hall on the left. I asked him about food, and he just shrugged. There wasn't anything open nearby, so I grabbed a stale candy bar from the vending machine by the entrance. I made my way to my room 107, noticing the worn carpet in the hallway and the faint smell of cleaning chemicals mixed with something musty inside the room. I saw a simple setup: a bed with a thin blanket, a tiny table, and a single chair. The TV was an old box-style set placed on a wooden dresser. The walls were a pale yellow, maybe from paint, maybe from age. A small window looked out onto a narrow strip of gravel and a chain-link fence. The fence had barbed wire on top, and behind it I could see some trees and a patch of tall grass. It wasn't exactly a scenic view, but I didn't care. I just tossed my duffel bag on the chair and sat on the bed. The spring squeaked under my weight. I felt a draft coming from the window, so I got up and checked if it was properly closed. It seemed to be locked. I decided to take a quick shower. The bathroom light flickered for a second before settling into a dull glow. The mirror had a crack along the edge and the towels were thin and stiff. The water pressure was okay though, and the temperature was decent. While I was washing my face, I thought I heard something outside, maybe footsteps on gravel. I turned off the water and listened, but I couldn't make out any clear sounds. It felt quiet, almost like the air was waiting for something. I brushed it off, dried myself, and changed into sweatpants and a t-shirt. I walked back into the bedroom, turned on the TV, and flipped through a few channels. The reception was grainy. I settled on some late-night talk show, but the sound buzzed in a weird way and I couldn't focus on it. I felt uneasy. I looked at the window again and saw my reflection in the glass. Then I noticed a strange shape outside, just beyond the fence. It was dark and the interior light created a glare, so I couldn't see clearly. I thought it might be a shadow from a tree or something. I told myself not to get paranoid. I turned off the TV and got into bed. I pulled the blanket up to my chest and closed my eyes. I tried to relax, but my mind kept drifting to that shape. I thought I saw it. Seemed crouched low to the ground, almost like someone watching. I took a deep breath and shifted my position. The mattress felt lumpy, and every time I moved the springs made a popping sound. Eventually I fell asleep. Sometime around 1 or 2 in the morning, a cold feeling woke me up. My eyes snapped open and I looked around. The room was dark except for the faint red glow of the alarm clock on the nightstand. My heart was beating fast and I wasn't sure why. Then I turned toward the window. I saw the outline of something crouched on the other side of the glass. It wasn't tall, but it was shaped like a person, hunched down and holding still. My stomach tightened, my chest felt tight. I started to sweat. The figure didn't move for a few seconds. I couldn't see its face, just the silhouette. I reached for the lamp, but I fumbled and knocked it over. It banged against the table. When the light finally turned on, the silhouette was gone. My mouth went dry. I got up, walked to the window, and peered outside. I saw the fence, the patch of grass, and the same trees. Nothing else. No footprints, no sign of anyone. I told myself I was seeing things. Maybe I was half asleep. Maybe it was a shadow from a passing car. I checked the time, 2:13 a.m. I wanted to sleep, but my pulse was racing and I could feel my arms trembling. I sat on the edge of the bed for a while, trying to steady my breathing. Eventually I lay back down and forced myself to keep my eyes closed until I drifted off again. In the morning I got dressed, left my key at the front desk, and headed to a diner nearby for a quick breakfast. I felt exhausted, like I'd barely slept. The coffee tasted weak and the eggs were overcooked, but I didn't care. I was still thinking about what I saw. Part of me believed it was just my imagination. After all, that fence behind the motel looked pretty secure. Nobody would want to lurk out there, right? I went back to the motel because I had another night booked. I saw the same older guy at the front desk. I told him I'd be staying a second night and asked about that fenced area behind the rooms. He said it was a private zone the motel used for storage and there was no public access. It was locked off. I mentioned seeing someone outside. He gave me a blank stare and shrugged again. He said, "There's nobody back there. We keep it locked all the time." His tone was flat and he didn't offer any reassurance. I felt uneasy, but I tried to brush it off. I spent the afternoon driving around, trying to keep my mind off that strange figure. I visited a local gas station, bought some snacks, and tried to plan the rest of my road trip. I didn't have a strict schedule, but I wanted to reach the next city by the weekend. I thought about finding a different motel for the second night, but I'd already paid and I didn't want to go through the hassle of looking for another place. I told myself it was just paranoia that I was overtired. When I got back to my room, I noticed the bed was made and the towels had been changed. Everything else looked the same. I drew the curtains close, double-checked the window lock and tested the door lock a few times. I tried to stay calm. I sat on the bed, turned on the TV and watched some random sitcom. My eyes kept flicking to the window. My hands felt cold and my heart thumped a little faster every time I heard a noise from outside, like a car passing by or a door shutting in the hallway. Around midnight, I got ready for bed. I shut off the TV, turned off the lights and settled under the blanket. The traffic noise on the nearby highway was constant, but it seemed quieter than the night before. I felt myself getting sleepy. Then I heard a soft scraping sound at the window. My eyes opened wide and my pulse kicked up. I tried to stay quiet, listening carefully. It was a slow, deliberate scratch, like something brushing against the glass. I could feel my skin tingling. I slid out of bed and walked toward the window in the dark. I kept my body low, hoping whoever or whatever was out there wouldn't see me. I leaned my head close to the glass, heart pounding in my ears. I heard something like a soft exhale. My palms were sweaty. I reached for the lamp switch, flicked it on and pulled the curtain aside in one quick motion. Nothing. I looked left and right. I even banged on the window to see if anyone would run. Silence, just the fence in the still grass under the faint light of the motel's back lamp. I stood there for a moment, breathing hard. Then I moved back to the bed, sat down and tried to calm myself. My arms felt weak, my legs tingled with anxiety. I considered going to the front desk, but I figured the old man would just shrug again. I decided to stay awake and keep an eye on the window until morning. I turned the TV back on, kept the volume low and settled against the headboard with a pillow behind my back. My eyelids grew heavy after a couple of hours. The last time I glanced at the clock, it was almost 3 a.m. Before I knew it, I was out the next day. I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating on the nightstand. It was a reminder about an appointment a few days away in another city. My neck felt stiff and my back ached from sleeping upright. I rubbed my eyes, looked around and saw that nothing in the room had changed. I checked the window again. It was locked. Just as I left it, the curtains were slightly parted, letting in a sliver of morning light. I stood up and looked outside. The grass and trees were still there, but I didn't see any sign of footprints. The fence appeared untouched. I went to the front desk, hoping to find a different staff member, but the same old man stood there staring at a small TV behind the counter. I asked him if there were security cameras behind the motel. He said they had some older cameras in front of the building, but nothing in the back because it was a locked area. I asked about the possibility of someone climbing over the fence. He said it's got barbed wire. No one's going in or out without a big effort. Then he added, "You're seeing things. This place is quiet." His voice lacked any concern. I felt my nerves kicking in again. My stomach churned. I looked around the lobby. It was empty. The vending machine hummed in the corner. A single overhead light buzzed. I said, "I know what I saw." There was a shape crouched outside my window. It happened twice. He just shrugged. Again, I took a step closer, trying not to sound hysterical. Is there any other entrance back there?" I asked. "Any way for someone to sneak in?" He shook his head. "No, sir," he replied. He pointed to a small door near the side, adding, "We keep that locked. Only staff has the key, and I'm the only staff here tonight." I felt uneasy about staying another night. so I decided to pack up and leave. I told the manager I was checking out early. He didn't argue, he just handed me my bill and looked bored. The total was a bit more than I expected, but I didn't care. I wanted to get on the road. I walked back to my room, gathered my stuff, and paused near the window one last time. I felt a chill run down my arms. I stared at the fence, imagining someone hunched there. My body tensed up at the thought, but it was daylight and everything looked normal. I locked my suitcase, grabbed my bag, and left the room. As I walked down the hallway, I noticed the silence again. No other guests seemed to be around. The parking lot had only my car and that old pickup truck. It felt wrong. I tossed my things in the trunk and got into the driver's seat. The engine started with a rumble. I looked at the motel in the rear view mirror. The curtains in one window to the right of mine moved slightly. It could have been the AC blowing them, or maybe someone was standing there. I couldn't tell. I pulled out of the parking lot and got onto the highway. My hands gripped the steering wheel and my chest felt tight. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror for a few miles, half expecting to see something following me. Nothing did. The road stretched ahead and I told myself I was safe. My body relaxed a little once I put some distance between me and that motel. Still, the memory lingered in my mind like a bad taste. I don't know what was out there. I don't know if it was a person who found a way past the fence or something else, but I know I saw a crouched figure looking into my room. I remember the shape, the sense of a presence, and the chill that hit my spine, the way it vanished so quickly when the light came on, and how the manager insisted that area was locked tight. I can't forget the way my heart pounded and the feeling of dread that kept me awake. That's all I've got, just a few hours of lost sleep and a memory that makes my skin crawl whenever I think about it. Even now, every time I see a window at night, I can't help but check if something is crouched outside waiting to be seen. I always thought closing time at the restaurant would be simple. I'd wipe down the tables, lock the doors, check the cash register, and finally get to go home. But after that first night, I heard those scratching sounds in the basement. Everything changed now. I dread the last hour of every shift because I know what's waiting under the floor. I can handle rowdy customers, broken glasses, and the usual stress, but that noise gets under my skin, and it happens when I'm alone with no one to back me up. I've tried to shrug it off as loose pipes or an old ventilation system, but every time I turn on the basement light, my stomach tightens. Let me tell you exactly what I've been dealing with. I started working at this small family-owned restaurant about 6 months ago. It's a standard layout, a cozy dining area, a small bar near the entrance, a kitchen in the back, and a staircase leading to a basement used mostly for storage. The basement has these cheap white tiles on the walls and a few shelves for dry goods. There's an extra refrigerator down there for overflow items like sauces and dressings. The ceiling is low, the lights are fluorescent, and the bulbs flicker if they're on for too long. It smells musty like damp cardboard and clean supplies. I never had a reason to be afraid of it at first. It was just another room in a place that paid me decently. About a month ago, I had my first encounter with the sound. It was around 11 p.m. I was the last person on the clock. Our closing routine is straightforward: lock the front door, turn off the lights in the dining area, shut down the registers, clean the kitchen a bit, and do one final check downstairs to confirm the fridge is closed and the shelves aren't missing anything important. I was in the kitchen about to head out when I heard something like nails or claws scraping against a hard surface. It sounded faint but distinct enough to make me pause. I looked around thinking maybe a loose sheet tray had shifted on the stainless steel counters, but everything was in place. The noise stopped, so I assumed it was just my imagination or some random kitchen noise. I almost left it at that, but I had a nagging feeling to check the basement before walking out. I grabbed the flashlight I keep near the register. Our manager told us to keep one on hand because the basement light can flicker sometimes. Then I headed down the stairs. I was tired and I just wanted to go home. The entire time I was thinking, this is stupid. I'm probably just paranoid. When I got to the basement it felt colder than usual and the overhead light was off. I stepped inside, turned on the flashlight and scanned the walls. Nothing looked wrong. The shelves were in order. The fridge was humming softly. No open boxes, no footprints on the floor, no sign of water leakage. But then I turned off the flashlight intending to turn on the main light. I fumbled for the switch and right at that moment I heard a soft scraping sound. It came from the far side of the basement near the corner where we stack unused chairs and old equipment. I felt a jolt of adrenaline in my chest. My mouth went dry and my fingers felt clammy around the flashlight. I flipped the main light on and the room looked ordinary. The noise stopped. I took a few steps toward the corner trying to keep my breathing steady, but there was nothing there. No rats, no loose metal parts, just a couple of old bar stools, a small stack of boxes and the tile walls. I checked everything I could think of. I even moved the boxes to see if something was hiding behind them. I came up empty. I chalked it up to nerves. I turned off the basement light and locked up, but as I reached the top of the stairs I thought I heard that scratching again. I froze. My scalp tingled and my chest tightened. I listened hard. This time it was weaker, but I could still make it out. I turned the light back on and rushed downstairs, but it was silent again. I left the building soon after. I remember walking to my car trying to calm down, feeling annoyed at myself for letting a little noise get to me. The next day I mentioned it to a coworker who sometimes stays late. He just shrugged and said he'd never heard anything like that. He joked that the place might have ghosts. We had a laugh, but the idea stuck in my head as the nights went on. I found myself dreading the basement check more and more. A week after that first night I heard the sound again. This time it was louder. I was wiping down the kitchen counter and I could clearly hear a scratching noise coming from below. It was like long nails scraping across tile. Then pausing, then scraping again. My heart started beating faster. I looked around to see if there was someone else in the kitchen who could confirm it, but I was alone. The manager had left hours ago. I thought about ignoring it, but I had to check the basement before leaving. It's part of the job, so I grabbed the flashlight again and made my way downstairs. I switched on the basement light right away, thinking that might scare off whatever was making the noise. Once again silence. The shelves were all in place. The fridge was running smoothly. I checked the corners, looked under the shelves, examined the boxes, but everything looked normal. I tried clapping my hands a few times to see if something would rustle or scurry away, but nothing moved. The scratching sounds were gone. When I finally turned off the light I felt uneasy. I stood there for a few seconds listening. My palms were sweating and I took shallow British English breaths because I kept expecting something to jump out from behind the shelves. Nothing happened. After a few more nights of this I started to get more methodical. I asked our manager if we had cameras that captured the basement. We do, but only one camera points down the stairwell. It doesn't show the corners or the far walls. I looked at the footage from the nights in question, but I couldn't see anything strange. The only thing the camera showed was me going in and out. No animals, no other people, no shadows. I brought it up again with my co-workers and they all said I must be tired or hearing the plumbing. I tried to believe them, but the scratching kept coming back whenever I was alone. Even worse, I noticed it usually started after I turned off most of the lights upstairs. It was almost as if the noise was waiting for darkness. Before it started up again one night, I decided to record the sound on my phone. I thought that if I had evidence, maybe the owner would call an exterminator or bring someone in to check the walls, so I waited until close, locked up, turned off the dining area lights and stood in the kitchen with my phone's recorder running. At first it was just the hum of the dishwasher and a faint buzz from the fluorescent lights. Then I heard it scratch, pause, scratch, scratch. It sent a chill up my spine. I turned on my phone's flashlight and walked toward the basement door. My hand was shaking a bit when I opened it. I stepped onto the top stair, kept the phone pointed forward, and listened. The scratching got louder. It echoed against the tile walls. It wasn't a random squeak, it was a steady motion, like someone drawing a line across tile with a hard object. My pulse pounded in my ears. I took one step down, the noise kept going. I took another step. Suddenly the noise stopped. Everything was silent except for my breath. I turned on the basement light, went all the way down and tried to follow where the sound might have been coming from. I pressed my hand against the tile walls, expecting to feel vibrations or something loose, but they were solid. There was no movement, no cracked tile, no rodents, nothing. I played back the recording and I could hear the noise, but it was faint and overshadowed by my own footsteps. It wasn't good proof. I stayed in the basement for a few more minutes, scanning everything, but I got nothing. I felt frustrated and a little shaky. Eventually I gave up and went home. Over the next few weeks the sound continued at odd intervals. It wasn't every night. Sometimes I'd close up and hear nothing. Other nights the scratching would go on for several minutes, stopping the moment I turned on the basement light. I stopped telling my co-workers about it because they either joked about ghosts or told me I was imagining things. Our manager said he'd put in a maintenance request, but nobody came to fix anything because we couldn't pinpoint a real issue. We had no signs of rats or mice. The health inspectors never found droppings. The walls looked normal. The cameras showed nothing. I started to feel uneasy the moment I walked into my shifts. I'd think about the basement all day, dreading the final hour. During the day the place felt normal. Customers came in, orders went out, the phone rang for takeout. Everything was fine, but once it got quiet at night my mind drifted to that scratching. The worst part was how my body reacted. My throat would tighten, my shoulders would tense, and I'd break into a sweat if I even thought about going downstairs after dark. I tried blasting music on my phone when I did my closing routine, hoping that if I kept my ears busy I wouldn't notice the scratching, but it was impossible to ignore. Sometimes it started so softly that it blended with the hum of the restaurant equipment, and I wouldn't realize it was happening until it got louder. One particular night I was more on edge than usual. The chef had left in a hurry and the dishwasher was broken, so we had to arrange a repair for the following morning. I was alone by 10:30 p.m., which was earlier than normal. I could feel my nerves building up. I took my time wiping the counters and tried to distract myself, but as soon as I flipped off the main dining area lights, the scratching started. This time it sounded faster, like something was scrambling across the tile. I jumped, knocking over a bucket of cleaning rags. I cursed under my breath, picked them up and stared at the basement door. My skin prickled. I gripped the flashlight and forced myself to walk over. My hand felt sweaty on the doorknob. I opened the door and heard the scratching continue. My heart raced. I could feel it pounding against my ribs. I put one foot on the step and noticed my legs felt stiff. I took a breath and forced myself downstairs. With each step the scratching got louder, like it was right behind the wall. When I reached the bottom I flipped on the light. The scratching stopped so suddenly that I almost dropped the flashlight. My body was shaking. I stared at the walls, the shelves, the fridge, trying to see if anything had moved. Everything was still. The air felt colder than usual. I walked around the basement, shining the flashlight on each tile. I checked the corners again, then I started tapping the walls, hoping to find a hollow spot. I didn't find any. The entire basement felt solid. I even opened the fridge to make sure the motor wasn't making some weird noise. It was fine the moment I switched off the light to go back upstairs. The scratching returned. I turned the light back on. It stopped off again. It resumed on again. Silence. I repeated this a few times, feeling my heart thump harder each time. It was consistent. Light on, no sound. Light off, scratching. I stood there breathing fast, not sure what to do. Eventually I left the light on and went upstairs. I grabbed the stool from the kitchen and sat by the door, thinking maybe I'd catch something on camera if I aimed my phone down the stairs, but I got nothing except a flickering video of the basement light. That pattern became a routine for me. Whenever the noise started, I'd flip the basement light on. It would stop. I'd turn it off. It would start again. I did this on 4 or 5 different nights. I never saw anything move. I never saw a shadow or a figure. I only heard that scraping sound on the tile, like nails or claws. It made my stomach twist. I felt like I was losing my mind. I checked the cameras again and again. No movement in or out of the basement except me. I wondered if something could be living behind the walls, but there wasn't any sign of openings. The tile looked sealed around the edges. Now I've settled into a strange habit. When it's time to close, I turn on every light in the restaurant, including the basement, and I keep them on until the last possible moment. The power bill might go up, but I don't care. The owner hasn't said anything about it yet. I sweep and mop, lock the doors, finish the registers, all with the basement light glaring away. I don't hear the scratching as long as the light is on, but the minute I switch it off, if I linger for more than a few seconds, I hear it. I don't understand it, and I don't want to push my luck. I just make sure everything is done before I turn off that last light. Then I sprint up the stairs, lock the basement door, and head out to my car as fast as I can. I haven't quit yet because I need the paycheck, but every shift feels like a countdown to that final moment. I don't have any real explanation for what's happening, and nobody believes me enough to do a thorough investigation. I've tried to keep records in a small notebook, noting the date and time whenever I hear the scratching. There's no clear pattern except that it prefers darkness and total silence. I've thought about bringing a friend in after hours, but I'm not allowed to have unauthorized people in the restaurant. The owner is strict about that, so I keep facing it alone, hoping I won't hear those nails on tile. Nothing else has happened besides the sound itself. No damage to the walls, no missing supplies, no sign of a person, but that constant scraping sound is enough to keep me up at night. My neck and shoulders ache from the tension I carry after each shift. Sometimes when I lie in bed, I imagine I hear it in my apartment. It's just my mind playing tricks on me, I'm sure, but it freaks me out. I'm more jumpy than I used to be. Little noises make me tense up. Even the squeak of my own shoes on wet pavement can make my heart race. I've considered looking for a new job, but nothing else around here pays as steadily. The restaurant is actually a decent place to work, except for whatever is in that basement. For now, I deal with it by flipping on every light, checking the basement last, and trying not to linger in the dark. It's become my routine. I don't know how much longer I can keep it up. Every time I'm alone, I feel like I'm listening for that scratching, waiting for it to start. But so far it hasn't stopped completely. It's always waiting somewhere under those tiles, and until I figure out what's causing it, or until someone believes me enough to help investigate, I'll keep closing the restaurant in a full blaze of fluorescent lights, hoping that the darkness never gets a chance to welcome that sound again. I still remember the jolt I felt the first night I heard the scratching. It was around midnight, and I had just settled into my makeshift bed in the living room. The townhouse was quiet for a moment, then it started, soft at first, like nails tapping on wood. I sat up and listened. The noise came from above, directly above. It sounded too deliberate to be pipes or some loose shutter. I felt my chest tighten. There was no one living in the attic, and the door leading up there was locked. I tried to shake off my unease, but the sound repeated, a slow scraping noise that sent a chill through me. That night I barely slept. I kept waiting for the scratching to stop, but it continued off and on until early morning. When I woke up, my neck felt stiff and I had a headache. I told myself it was probably an animal, maybe a raccoon had gotten stuck inside. I still had boxes to unpack though, and I was exhausted from the move. I didn't bother investigating right away. Instead, I forced myself through my daily routine. I ate a quick breakfast of toast and black coffee, then started organizing the kitchen. In the back of my mind, I wondered if I should call someone to check out the attic, but I decided to wait one more night to see if the noise continued. The second night the sound was louder. It started around the same time, maybe close to midnight. I was sitting in the living room again, scrolling through news on my phone. My back was sore from unpacking. The moment I heard the first long scrape above me, I froze. I didn't want to overreact, so I turned off the TV and listened more carefully. The scratching felt more intense, like something was dragging along the floor. I tried to ignore the knot forming in my stomach. After a few minutes, I went to the base of the staircase that led to the attic door. I stood there in the dark hallway. The scratching continued, steady and slow, right above my head. I leaned against the wall and listened. My heart was pounding. The hall felt colder than the rest of the house. I could feel the draft creeping down from the attic. I noticed a thin layer of dust on the banister and a few cobwebs in the corners of the ceiling. The previous owners had left some furniture, but they told me the attic was never used for anything important. They also mentioned the door was stuck and they hadn't bothered trying to unstick it at the time. I didn't question it now. I regretted not asking more. I reached up and tried the knob. It didn't budge. I put my ear to the door. The scratching was so close I could almost feel the vibration through the wood. I felt a clench in my gut, like I should step back. A tingling sensation ran down my arms. My instincts told me not to mess with whatever was inside, but I also felt a burst of frustration. It was my house now. I should be able to open any door I wanted. The next day I searched the basement for tools. I found a rusted crowbar, some screwdrivers, and a hammer. I brought them upstairs and placed them near the attic door. I wanted to gather the courage to force it open, but something held me back. I was worried about damaging the frame or the old door. I was also worried about what I might find up there. My mind conjured images of a large animal, maybe rabbit or a nest of rats. Still, the scratching continued to bother me. That evening I called a friend to talk about it. I told him there was a weird noise in my attic. He laughed and said it was probably just rodents. He recommended setting traps or calling an exterminator. I nodded along, trying to convince myself it was that simple, but the moment I hung up I felt uneasy again. The house felt large and empty. Every corner seemed to creak. I heard the wind rattling the windows in the front room. Everything felt off balance. By the fourth night I was on edge. My hand shook a bit when I walked upstairs with the crowbar. I told myself I was done waiting. I had to see what was behind that door. The scratching had become more persistent and started earlier in the evening. It sounded like claws dragging across the floorboards. I took a deep breath and wedged the crowbar against the door frame. I applied pressure, but the door didn't give. I felt my arm strain, my shoulder HDHD from the effort. The door seemed stubborn as Though something on the other side pressed back, I took a moment to catch my breath, then I tried again harder. The wood groaned, but still held sweat bead on my forehead. My heart pounded in my ears. I could still hear the scratching, steady and repetitive. It almost felt like it matched the rhythm of my own heartbeat when the door refused to open. I threw the crowbar down in frustration. The clang echoed in the hallway. My nerves felt raw and my patience was gone. I shouted at the door, demanded it open, but nothing happened. The noise inside paused for a few seconds, then started up again as if taunting me. I decided to check the exterior of the house to see if there was any other access point. Outside, the sky was clear, but the air was cold enough to make my breath visible. I walked around to the side of the townhouse and spotted a small vent near the roof line. It was too small for me to climb through, and it looked intact. There were no broken shingles, no holes, nothing obvious. I glanced at the windows on the second floor, but they were all secured. No ladder would get me up there safely without risking a bad fall. I felt stuck when I went back inside. I tried to distract myself. I cleaned the living room and took out some boxes. I organized my closet and tried to watch an old movie, but every few moments my mind wandered back to the attic door. I kept hearing faint tapping overhead like an itch I couldn't scratch. I found myself glaring at the ceiling, wishing it would stop. Eventually I dozed off on the couch. I woke up sometime after midnight to the same scraping sound. It was louder than before and it felt constant. My body tensed up, my hands were sweaty and my heart was racing. I felt like a prisoner in my own house. The next morning I skipped breakfast and went straight to the hardware store. I told the clerk I had a stuck attic door and I needed something stronger than a basic crowbar. He handed me a heavy-duty pry bar. He asked if I was planning a major demolition. I just shook my head and said the door was giving me trouble. He shrugged and wished me luck on my way home. I felt a mix of determination and dread. I wanted this to be over, but I couldn't shake the unease growing in my gut. I got back and went straight to the attic door. I planted my feet, wedged the new tool at the seam, and pushed with everything I had. My muscles burned. The door frame creaked, then splintered. Finally, the lock gave out with a sharp crack. The door swung open a few inches. A cold draft rushed out. My nose caught a stale, musty smell like old wood and stagnant air. I felt goosebumps form on my arms. The scratching had stopped the moment I started prying. I stood there with my hand on the doorknob, afraid to pull it open any further. I flicked on the hallway light, but it barely penetrated the darkness inside the attic. I found my flashlight in a drawer nearby. My fingers were trembling as I turned it on. I pushed the door open slowly and aimed the beam into the attic. The stairs went up about 10 feet at a steep angle. Dust particles floated in the air. The floorboards looked warped and worn. I stepped inside and the old wood groaned beneath my weight. My heart felt like it might burst out of my chest. I half expected something to jump out at me, but there was nothing. I saw a few old cardboard boxes stacked along the wall, some loose insulation, and a stained rug rolled up in a corner. The rafters were covered in cobwebs, and the only light came from my flashlight. The smell was stronger inside. It made me cough. I listened carefully for any sound of movement. I heard my own breathing, fast and shallow, echo in the cramped space. I started checking each corner. The boxes were full of old clothes, musty blankets, and some magazines dated decades ago. I didn't see any signs of large animals. I didn't see any droppings or nests. The insulation looked mostly untouched. I ran the flashlight along the floor, searching for holes or cracks that might allow an animal inside. I found a few gaps in the corners, but they didn't seem large enough for anything bigger than a mouse. I took careful steps, watching for loose boards. I kept my grip on the pry bar just in case as I moved toward the back of the attic. The floor squeaked under me. There was a low triangular space near the eaves that was too dark to see clearly. I crouched down and shined the light inside. The smell grew worse, almost like rotting wood. I noticed a small pile of debris, scraps of cloth, bits of paper, and a cluster of splinters. It was arranged in a messy heap like something had been shredding materials. My pulse picked up. It looked fresh, as if it had been disturbed recently. I reached out to move the debris with the pry bar. My hand was shaking. Underneath, I saw scratch marks on the wooden floor. They were thin but deep, running in crisscross patterns. They didn't look random. They looked like something had been trying to claw its way in or out. I felt a wave of dread. I stood up too quickly and bumped my head on a rafter. Pain shot through my skull. I hissed and stumbled, nearly dropping the flashlight. The beam flickered and my stomach flipped. I thought I saw movement in the corner, but when I aimed the light again, there was nothing there. My heart hammered in my chest. I took a few steps backward, never turning my back on that dark corner. I could feel the hairs on my arms standing up. I wanted to get out of there. I forced myself to take a breath and remind myself that I hadn't actually seen anything alive. Maybe I was letting my imagination get the best of me. Still, the pile of shredded material and the scratch marks bothered me. Something had been up here, or maybe still was. I decided to set up a camera. I had an old camcorder in one of my moving boxes. I went downstairs, found it, and brought it up. My hands felt clammy as I positioned it near the attic stairs facing the far corner. I planned to record overnight and see if anything showed up. I also scattered a few pieces of dry cat food on the attic floor, hoping to lure out whatever might be there. If it was a small animal, I'd catch it on film. That night the scratching returned. It started around 11 p.m. and sounded louder than ever. I lay on my couch, eyes wide open, listening. The sound wasn't just a random shuffle. It had a rhythm, like a deliberate attempt to scrape through the floor. My hands were sweating so much I had to wipe them on my pants. My chest felt tight and every muscle in my body tensed up. Each time the noise got louder, I wanted to run up there and scream at whatever was making that sound, but I stayed put, determined to catch it on camera. When the noise stopped in the early hours of the morning, I finally drifted off to sleep. I woke up stiff and disoriented. I immediately went upstairs to check the camera. The attic felt even colder than before. A faint draft moved through the open doorway. I picked up the camcorder and rewound the tape. My hands trembled as I pressed play. Most of the footage showed an empty attic. I heard the scraping on the audio. Around midnight, the camera picked up faint movement in the shadows near the pile of debris. I leaned in, trying to see. My pulse pounded in my ears. I caught a glimpse of something low to the ground. It moved with a slow, jerky motion. Then the tape went fuzzy. The camera must have lost focus. My stomach twisted. I replayed it multiple times, trying to make out the shape. It wasn't very clear, but it looked too big to be a rat and not quite the size of a raccoon. The way it moved made my skin crawl. I couldn't see any details, just a hunched shape dragging itself across the floor. Then it disappeared behind the boxes and the scratching sounds got louder on the audio. A few minutes later the camera went silent. I stood there holding the camcorder, my heart pounding. I felt sweat trickle down the back of my neck. My throat was dry and my limbs felt heavy. There was something in my attic, and it was bigger than I had imagined. It wasn't just a matter of setting track apps. I had no idea what I was dealing with. I turned off the camera and placed it on a nearby box. My mind raced. I could call an exterminator, but what if they didn't find anything? What if they laughed at me? I could call animal control, but how would I explain that? odd shape. I took a deep breath and decided to clear out the attic once and for all. I started by moving the boxes downstairs, checking each one to make sure I wasn't dragging out any stowaways. Then I swept the floor, gathering all the debris. I shined my flashlight into every corner and knocked on the walls to see if there were hollow spots. I found nothing that explained the scratching. I spent hours up there feeling jumpy at every creak. By the time I finished, I was drenched in sweat and my back HDHD from hauling boxes. The attic was empty now, just exposed boards and a few nails sticking up from the floor. That night I heard the noise again. It was even closer to the stairs this time. My skin prickled. I felt anger and dread twist together in my chest. I stood at the bottom of the attic steps listening to the scraping. My heart felt like it was about to explode. I switched on the flashlight and took one step up. The noise stopped. The silence was almost worse. I climbed the rest of the way. The attic was dark and cold. My breath caught in my throat. I aimed the flashlight around the room. It was completely empty. My heart was pounding and my stomach felt hollow. Suddenly there was a loud thump on the far side of the attic near the eaves. I jumped so hard I dropped the flashlight. It clattered on the floor and went out. I scrambled to pick it up, fingers fumbling in the dark. My breath was shallow and my hands were shaky. When I turned it back on, I saw nothing but the bare boards. I felt my heart hammering against my ribs. My eyes darted everywhere, but I didn't see any movement. The attic was still. I heard my own pulse thawing in my ears. I backed away, my legs trembling. I left the attic door open, rushed downstairs and slammed the hallway door. My body was shaking and I realized I was gripping the flashlight so hard my knuckles were white. I had no explanation for that thump. The attic was empty, yet something was in there. I could feel it. I spent the rest of the night in the living room, lights on, trying not to jump at every small creak of the old house. My mind raced with possibilities, but I kept coming back to the same realization. This thing didn't want to leave. It was scratching every night, getting louder, almost like it was growing more confident. I felt trapped. This was my house, but I no longer felt safe inside it. I knew I had to make a decision. I could pack up and stay with a friend, or I could keep fighting this unknown presence. By morning I still hadn't decided. My nerves were raw and I felt a lump in my throat whenever I thought about going back up there, but I also felt a stubborn urge to stand my ground. Whatever was in my attic, it wasn't going to chase me away, not without a real fight, and that's where I left it, standing at the base of those stairs. Flashlight in one hand, crowbar in the other, listening for any new sign of movement above. My stomach churned and my legs felt weak, but I knew I had to go back up. I just didn't know if I could handle what I might find. I never thought I'd get scared of my own bathroom mirror, but lately every time the sun goes down I feel this pinch in my stomach when I walk down the hall. My bathroom is at the end of that hallway. It's a small space with pale walls and cracked tiles. Near the sink there's an old mirror built into the wall above the sink, framed by dull metal edges. It's been there since before I moved in and I never paid much attention to it before. It's one of those things you accept without thinking, but about a month ago I noticed something strange at dusk. If I step close to that mirror, my reflection lags or moves in a way I don't expect. It's subtle, maybe half a second, but I see it, and a few times I'm almost certain my reflection looked right at me even when I turned my face to the side. At first I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was my imagination or maybe some weird lighting effect. I've got one of those old overhead lights that flickers sometimes, so I thought maybe it was just a flicker at the wrong moment, but I couldn't let it go. My gut told me something was off. One night around 7:30 I stepped into the bathroom and stared at that mirror. The reflection looked Normal at first. I blinked a couple of times, everything lined up, my lips, my nose, my eyes. Then as I exhaled and shifted my shoulders, I noticed the reflection took a split second longer to mimic the movement. My arms had already settled at my sides, but in the mirror they still looked slightly raised, like I was halfway through the motion. I froze and felt my heartbeat pick up. My face got warm, my throat went dry. I kept blinking and then it was gone. Everything matched up again. I washed my face, not saying anything out loud, but my heart was pounding. I expected it to be a one-time thing. I wanted it to be a one-time thing, but the next evening it happened again, and then again the night after. I tried switching the lights on and off, but that didn't stop it. I tried covering the mirror with a towel, but then, and I felt stupid. It's just a mirror, I told myself, but part of me was relieved not to see that weird lag. Eventually, though, I took the towel off because I needed to use the mirror for shaving. A few days later, I decided to check it during the daytime. Nothing odd happened in broad daylight. The reflection is fine. It's only at dusk or once the sun goes down that I notice any weird delay. That drove me nuts because it meant I couldn't just dismiss it as a trick of life. If it were a trick of natural sunlight, maybe it would happen during the day, but it doesn't. It's always around that twilight hour when I can't quite say if it's night or not. I started waiting for it on purpose. I'd watch the clock, wait until 6:30 or 7, then walk down the hallway. Each time my stomach would tighten, my mouth would get dry. I'd feel a sort of dull ache in my spine, like I was bracing for something. I'd step inside, face the mirror and watch. Usually the effect was small, maybe a slight hesitation in my reflection, but on 2 occasions I swear I saw my reflection blink after I'd already opened my eyes. My eyelids had lifted, but in the mirror it was still mid-blink. It caught up after a fraction of a second, but it was enough to give me chills. I couldn't explain it. One night I tried filming it with my phone. I propped the phone on a little stand on the sink so I could move around and see if the camera would catch anything. I tried different angles. I tried moving my arms, turning my head, shifting my stance, but when I played back the video, everything looked normal. No lag, no mismatch. The reflection did exactly what I did in real time. That gave me a cold sweat. It meant only my eyes were seeing it. The camera wasn't picking it up. I started sleeping on the living room couch. I told myself I was just crashing there because the TV was in the living room, so maybe I'd watch something and drift off, but deep down I didn't want to walk down that hallway at night. I didn't want to feel that creeping tension every time I passed the bathroom. It was embarrassing. I'm not a superstitious guy. I fix my own plumbing, change my own light bulbs, solve my own problems, but I had no solution for this. A week later I decided to try something more direct. I walked in at dusk and reached out to touch the mirror. The surface felt cold, which is normal, but I pressed my hand against the glass and waited. I could see my reflection's hand pressing back and it looked normal for a moment. Then I moved my finger slightly. There was that half-second delay again, like a glitch. My reflection's fingers were still for a breath longer, then caught up with mine. The hairs on my neck stood up. My breath sounded loud in my ears. My palms got sweaty, but I kept them on the mirror. I wanted to see if it would happen again. I flexed my fingertips. I watched the reflection again. There was that almost invisible pause, then it synced up. I let go and backed away. I felt a knot in my stomach, like I was about to get sick. I had no idea what to do. I thought about getting rid of the mirror, but it's built into the wall. I could try to smash it, but that seemed excessive, and I was also afraid of what might happen if I did, so I left it for the time being. I tried ignoring it as best I could. That worked for a while, until one evening I went to brush my teeth. I flicked on the light, squeezed toothpaste onto my brush, and then started scrubbing As I leaned forward, I noticed my reflection's head was turned slightly toward me more than it should be. If it were just mirroring my movement, it was staring right at my eyes, not exactly matching my tilt. My heart started racing. I slowly straightened up. The reflection straightened too, but the expression was slightly off. There was a tightness in its face that I couldn't place. Then it snapped back to normal. The rest of the night I felt on edge. I got to the point where I stopped using that bathroom after sunset. I'd do everything I needed before the sun went down, or I'd use the bathroom at my office if it got late, but that felt ridiculous. A grown man avoiding his own mirror. It was affecting my routine. I started losing sleep. I'd lie in bed thinking about that strange lag, thinking about how my reflection sometimes watched me even when I wasn't looking directly at it. 2 nights ago I decided I was done playing this game. I walked in at dusk, left the lights off and used only a small flashlight. I pointed the flashlight at the mirror and slowly approached it. The reflection was harder to see, but I could still make out my shape. My chest felt tight and I could hear my breathing echo against the tiled walls. I raised my hand. The reflection also raised its hand, but I noticed it paused just for a beat. Then it lifted. My throat constricted. I whispered, "Do what I do." I know that sounds strange, talking to my own reflection, but I did it anyway. I moved my head side to side. The reflection did the same, but with that split-second lag. My scalp prickled. I decided to try something else. I took a step back and pointed the flashlight at the floor. I wanted to see if the reflection would move in tandem if I wasn't shining light on the mirror. When I looked up again, I saw my reflection was still standing there, and for a split second I swear it was facing me head on, not angled the same way I was. It caught up quickly though and shifted into the same stance. My heart hammered. I could feel sweat rolling down my back. I backed out of the bathroom, not even bothering to turn on the main light. After that I tried to come up with a rational explanation. Maybe it's my eyesight, maybe it's stress, but that wouldn't explain the fact I only see it at dusk, and it wouldn't explain the intensity of that strange feeling that someone's watching me from inside the glass. My nerves are shot. Last night I did something I never thought I'd do. I tried talking to it again, but this time I did it calmly. I walked in around 7, even turned on the overhead light and just stared at the reflection. "What are you?" I asked. I don't believe in ghosts or anything like that, but I felt like I had to say something. My reflection just stared back for a minute. Everything looked normal. Then I lifted my hand to my face, and sure enough, there was that tiny delay. My reflection's hand reached up a moment later, almost like it was mocking me. I felt a weird pressure in my chest and my hand started trembling. I stood there for a long time, probably 10 minutes, just watching. Sometimes the reflection moved in sync, other times it lagged. At one point it seemed to be looking directly into my eyes, and I realized I was holding my breath. I exhaled and my reflection didn't exhale at the same time. It exhaled a moment after, like it was imitating me. I felt a pang of fear in my stomach, like I was looking at something that wasn't entirely me. I tried to film it again, but just like before, the video showed everything normal. I played it back in slow motion, looking for any sign of the delay, but there was nothing on the screen. I moved at the same time as my reflection, like a normal mirror image. That's when I decided I had to talk to someone about it, but I knew how crazy it would sound. My friend Dave came over for a beer last week, and I hinted that something was off with my bathroom mirror. He laughed and said, "You just need to get out more, probably a lighting thing." I told him he was right, but deep inside I felt that same fear creeping up. I knew he wouldn't see it. I almost wanted to show him, but I was afraid it would look normal in front of him, or worse, it would actually show up for both of us and I'd have no idea how to handle that, so now I'm in a routine I hate. I avoid the mirror after sunset. I try not to think about it, but every time I pass by that bathroom door at night I feel this crawling sensation on my neck. It's like I know there's something in there waiting for me to come closer. I've started showering in the morning just so I don't have to be in that room at night. The tension is wearing me down. My hands sometimes shake when I brush my teeth. My eyes are bloodshot from lack of sleep, and I keep checking my reflection during the day, hoping I'll spot something that would prove me wrong. But the mirror is normal under bright light. I've begun considering drastic solutions. Part of me wants to rip the mirror out of the wall. I looked into how I do that. I'd need to pry out the metal frame and probably patch up the plaster behind it. I even got some tools ready, but every time I think about going through with it I freeze up. My breath catches. I imagine hitting the mirror with a hammer and seeing that reflection smirking at me a split second before the glass shatters. I imagine the shards on the floor, each tiny piece reflecting a lagging version of me. I can't bring myself to do it yet. Yesterday around dusk I built up some nerve. I walked into the bathroom, slowly turned on the overhead light and faced the mirror. I watched closely for a sign of the delay. My arms felt heavy and my forehead was damp with sweat. I tried to keep a neutral expression, but my reflection's expression seemed tense, like it was anticipating something. I leaned forward, gripping the sides of the sink. I could see my reflection's knuckles turning white a fraction of a second after mine did. My gut twisted. I stayed there for a while, breathing in and out, focusing on matching my reflection as best I could. Occasionally it matched me perfectly, but then I'd catch that half-second lag again. It felt like a silent power struggle. I was trying to catch it in the act, and it was trying to mimic me just enough so I couldn't be sure, but I am sure I know what I'm seeing. I can't explain it, and it hasn't hurt me or anything like that, but it's messing with my head. My heart races whenever I think about it. I've even started leaving the house around sunset and going for a drive just so I don't have to be in the same building when that weird delay shows up. But I can't keep running forever. Tonight I'm sitting here in my living room writing all this down and thinking about my next move. My arms are tense and I can't stop tapping my foot on the floor. There's no easy solution, and I don't want to invite someone over to check it out because I feel ridiculous. But the truth is, this mirror has become a source of constant dread. I'm an adult and I'm afraid of my own reflection. That's the bottom line. I need to make a decision. Either I tear the mirror out and deal with the wall repairs, or I learn to live with it. But I'm not sure how to live with something that behaves like a reflection one moment and then lags behind the next. It's like it has its own sense of timing. I can't say it's alive, but I also can't say it's just a piece of glass. It leaves me with a heaviness in my chest whenever I think about it. For now I avoid that bathroom every night. I keep the door closed. I keep the hallway light off. If I need the bathroom, I use the one downstairs next to the laundry room, which doesn't have a mirror. It's not a perfect solution, but at least it keeps me from that suffocating feeling I get when I see my reflection do something off. That's where I stand right now. There's an old mirror in my bathroom wall that likes to play tricks on me at dusk. Maybe it's all in my head, but it feels too real when I see it, and so far there's no simple fix. I'm just sitting here waiting to decide whether to smash that thing or keep pretending it's just another part of the house. But if I'm honest, I know I can't ignore it forever. Something has to give, and I'm pretty sure I'll be the first to crack. I moved into this old wooden house a few weeks ago. It was cheap and I like the idea of a quiet place outside the city. Now I regret that decision. Something here feels wrong at night. When I walk in the corridors I sense A soft touch through the gaps between the floorboards. It feels like fingers brushing against my feet from below. At first I thought it was my imagination or the wind, but there's more to it. There are faint tapping noises, one tap for each of my steps, always in sync with my movements. I didn't believe in anything strange before, but I can't ignore what's happening. I live here alone. The house is small, with a single bedroom, a cramped bathroom, a living room, and a narrow kitchen. The hallway connects the living room to the bathroom. In the bedroom, the boards are old and the house creaks all the time. During the day, the creaking doesn't bother me. I hear the wind pushing against the walls, and I hear the boards adjusting to humidity, but at night there's a different quality to the noises. They're not the random popping of aging wood, they're precise, almost deliberate. I noticed the finger-like sensation on my second night here. I was heading to the kitchen to get some water around midnight. The corridor was dark. I don't keep a night light on. I used my phone's flashlight. The moment I took my first step, I felt something beneath my foot, like a gentle push from under the floor. I paused and leaned down. I placed my hand on the board to see if it was loose. The board didn't move much. It creaked, but it felt solid enough. I shrugged and continued. After 3 steps, I felt it again, this time like a faint brushing against the side of my foot. Then I heard a soft tap, almost like a knuckle hitting the wood. In time with my steps, I froze and stared at the floor. My phone's flashlight beam was weak, but I could see dust, old boards, some dark gaps between them. There was no large space under the house, just a low crawl space. I tried to see if any rodent or something else was stuck there. I didn't see movement. I didn't see any change in the gap. Still, I felt anxious. I reached the kitchen, got my water, and headed back, dreading the walk. I took each step slowly. When my weight pressed down on the boards, I felt a flick of pressure along the side of my foot again. I clenched my jaw and hurried back to my room. Each step came with a matching tap. When I finally shut my bedroom door, the tapping stopped. I listened for a minute. No more sound. My heart was beating fast and my throat was dry. I told myself it had to be a weird echo or some shifting in the wood. I got into bed and slept fitfully. The next day I checked the crawl space. I went outside and unscrewed the small access panel at the back of the house. Inside it was dark and musty. I had a flashlight in one hand and a screwdriver in the other. The ground was uneven with rocks and patches of dirt. I could see the underside of the old floorboards. They looked grimy, covered with cobwebs and dust. I inched forward, scanning for animals or anything that might cause that tapping. I didn't see any nests or signs of a large rodent. I also didn't see any opening where a person could slip in. The space was too narrow for an adult to crawl around, at least without leaving noticeable tracks. After about 10 minutes I backed out. My clothes were dirty and I coughed from the stale air. I secured the panel again. I didn't find a reason for those tapping sounds. During the day everything seemed normal. The board still creaked, but no strange tapping. I spent the afternoon making small repairs around the house. I tightened loose screws on the kitchen cabinets. I replaced a light bulb in the hallway. I tried to keep my mind busy and ignore the memory of that night. I ate dinner early and stayed up watching a show on my laptop around 11. I shut everything off. I tried to push away the tension I felt creeping into my chest. I told myself the next time I heard or felt anything I would document it. I set up the voice recorder on my phone before leaving the bedroom. I wanted evidence. I turned on the flashlight and stepped into the corridor. The house was silent. I took one step and froze. I felt the faint brushing under the sole of my foot. Immediately I heard a light tap from somewhere under the floor. I inhaled sharply. My stomach turned. I took another step again. The same thing, a gentle nudge beneath the board followed by a single tap. It matched my pace, Perfectly, I held my phone low and near the floor, trying to capture the sound clearly. My hand was shaking a bit. I took 3 more steps, each one triggered another tap. The corridor felt colder than before. My arms tingled. I didn't smell anything out of the ordinary, just old wood and the dusty air, but my nerves felt raw. I reached the living room and stopped. The tapping stopped too. I swung the flashlight around, checking every corner. My couch was there. My small TV was off. The windows were locked. There was no sign of movement. Everything looked normal except for my own racing pulse. I decided to test something. I walked back to my bedroom, taking slow steps. For every step I felt the same faint push under my foot and heard the same tap. My jaw clenched harder with each tap. When I finally made it to my bedroom door, I slammed it shut behind me. My phone was still recording. I stopped the recording and played it back. I heard my own footsteps creaking on the boards. Then very faintly I heard small knocks in the background. It was enough to confirm I wasn't imagining it. I didn't sleep much that night. I stayed in bed listening. I half expected to hear tapping outside my door. I heard the wind, a few distant cars, but not the tapping. In the morning I tried listening to the recording again. The knocks were there, but they were soft. I could barely make them out without headphones. If I showed someone else, they might not think it was usual. Still, I knew what I felt. Around noon I checked the boards in the hallway from above, seeing if any were warped or had small holes. Everything looked old but intact. I tried prying one up, but it wouldn't budge. I stopped before causing damage to the floor. That evening I considered staying somewhere else for the night, but I thought leaving wouldn't solve anything. I owned this place and I needed to figure out what was going on. I ate dinner, kept all the lights on, and tried to stay calm. My phone sat on the table with the flashlight ready. By midnight I decided to walk around the house again. The tapping started right away. This time I tried a different tactic. I placed my foot down, carefully pressing my weight slowly, then lifting my foot just as slowly. I wanted to see if that changed the tapping. It didn't. The tapping mirrored every move, steady and consistent. My breathing became shallow and sweat dripped down my forehead. I tapped my foot without walking, hoping to trigger the noise in a single spot. I bent my knee and pressed my foot down repeatedly. In that one section of the corridor the tapping still came in perfect unison. It wasn't random at all. It felt like someone was right beneath me, copying my motions. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I couldn't stand it. I rushed to the far end of the corridor. The tapping kept pace. When I reached the living room I turned around and yelled, "Is anybody there?" My voice echoed. I heard nothing in response. My chest was tight and my breathing felt rough. I looked out the window toward the backyard. It was pitch black outside. I had an urge to run out and drive away, but I couldn't bring myself to leave my own house in the middle of the night. Instead, I stood there until my breath steadied. Then I walked back to my bedroom. The tapping followed me. Once I shut the door, silence returned. I locked the door even though I knew that wouldn't protect me from anything that was under the floor. I sat on my bed, my back against the headboard, thinking about what to do next. My mind was spinning with images of someone crawling under the floor, but I checked the crawl space. It wasn't easy to move around there. It was also sealed from the outside. There weren't signs of forced entry. I considered calling a friend or a relative just to tell them I was freaked out, but I didn't want to sound paranoid. I stayed in bed exhausted but too wired to rest. Eventually, around 3 o'clock in the morning, I dozed off. I woke up late and immediately felt dread when I remembered the events of the night before. I spent the afternoon searching online for any clue. I looked up wood floor tapping in sin with footsteps. Most results were about normal house settling or plumbing issues, but this wasn't standard creaking or pipes. I decided to call a local handyman. He arrived about 5 In the afternoon I told him I'd been hearing strange noises in my flooring, possibly an animal. He checked the crawl space and looked around the exterior. He didn't find signs of infestation. He tapped the boards from below. I stood in the hallway and listened. It wasn't the same sound after half an hour. He said everything looked structurally fine. I thanked him, paid him, and watched him drive away. I felt more alone than ever that night. I sat in the living room with all the lights on. The TV was on mute. My phone was in my hand and I was ready to record again. I waited until midnight, trying to gather courage. My pulse was racing. My chest felt tight and my shoulders were tense. I got up and walked to the hallway entrance. I stood there staring at the floor. I placed my phone's flashlight on the corridor. Looked normal, just old wood and the outline of the door at the other end. I lifted my foot and took a step. The tapping came immediately. That light knock from beneath me. My breath caught in my throat. I took another step, another tap. My heart thumped, my stomach felt knotted. I couldn't believe this was happening again. I called out, "Whoever is there, leave me alone." I heard only my own breathing and the hum of the fridge in the kitchen. I walked a few more paces. The tapping didn't let up. I felt adrenaline coursing through my body. My legs felt weak, my arms tingled, and my grip. Keep walking. The corridor seemed longer than usual. Each step had a matching tap. My throat was so dry I could barely swallow. When I reached the bedroom door, I opened it fast and stepped inside. The tapping stopped. My skin was damp with sweat. My breathing was harsh. My mind was swirling with confusion and fear. I slammed the door again, locked it, and leaned against it. I didn't hear anything outside. The house was silent. I ended the recording and flopped onto my bed. My body trembled as I listened to the playback. The taps were clear and lined up with my steps. I decided I couldn't continue living this way. The stress was too much. I started packing a bag to stay at a motel. I threw some clothes into a duffel bag. My hands were shaking as I zipped it up. I grabbed my car keys from the nightstand. I opened my bedroom door. The corridor was dark, but I didn't turn the hallway light on. I thought maybe if I didn't walk slowly, if I just dashed out, it wouldn't happen. So I sprinted. I heard a series of rapid taps under the floor. My footfall sounded heavy. Every step brought a sharp knock from below. My heart hammered in my chest. I didn't stop. I made it to the front door, flung it open, and rushed outside. My car was parked in the gravel driveway. I jumped in and locked the doors. The engine started right away, and I drove off, leaving the lights on in the house. I got a room at a small motel on the edge of town. It's where I'm sitting now, typing this out on my laptop. My plan is to go back during the day, gather more of my stuff, and sell that place as fast as I can. I don't care if I lose money. I can't handle those nightly taps. I can't handle that feeling of fingers slipping through the gaps in the wood. I know I won't sleep well tonight. I still feel that sensation on my feet. I still hear those taps in my head. I can't explain it, and I don't want to stay there long enough to find out. Maybe someone else can figure it out someday. For me, I just need to be far away from that corridor at night. I'm done. I had sweat rolling down my face before I even saw the footprints. The afternoon sun was low and the trail was quiet except for my own steps. I remember gravel on the path making a faint scraping noise that echoed between the trees. I took a left turn where the brush thick, expecting nothing unusual. Then I saw the muddy patch ahead and noticed those giant tracks. They looked like footprints but were far larger than anything I'd expect from a human. The sight of them made my stomach feel tight. I stopped moving. I glanced around, listening for any signs of life. Nothing, just the breeze pushing some leaves around, but I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. I walked closer to those tracks. My boots sank a bit into the mud, so I had to pull each foot up With a bit of effort the footprints were deep and the spacing suggested long strides. I bent down and placed my hand next to one of the prints. My entire hand fit inside the outline with space to spare. The shape was broad with what looked like 5 distinct toes, but they were thick, almost like stubby ends. The edges were smeared, probably from water or from something shifting around. I reached out to touch the shallow water. Water pooled inside one of the prints and it felt cold, almost icy. My throat tightened. I had that weird tingling in my scalp that told me I should keep moving. I stood up and scanned the area. The trees were close together with thick trunks blocking most of the remaining sunlight. I could barely see the sky through the canopy. I listened for birds or small animals, but the wood seemed silent. No chirping, no rustling, just the sound of my own breathing. My brain started to go into overdrive, thinking about possibilities, but I reminded myself maybe it was just some weird trick of the mud. Maybe a bear had passed through yet. These prints didn't look like a bear's, they looked more like some large person's bare feet, but the size was wrong. I took a step back and kicked some loose dirt over the tracks that felt pointless, though, like I was trying to hide something from myself. I decided I'd finish my hike. I told myself I'd keep my eyes open, see if I found any more tracks, and then head back before dark. The air smelled damp like rain-soaked leaves. As I walked I heard the crunch of branches behind me, very faint but clear enough that I stopped. When I turned I saw nothing. My heart was thawing. I looked at the ground behind me, searching for a sign of movement, but all I saw was the spot where I discovered the prints. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The hair on my arm stood up. My eyes darted left and right, checking for any shadow or movement. I kept going, trying to ignore the growing tension in my chest. My boots sank into the soft earth here and there, leaving my own prints behind. I passed a small creek, stepping over some stones to avoid the water. That's when I heard a louder snap behind me, like a thick branch cracking. It sounded too close. I spun around again, scanning the surrounding trees. The thick foliage made it hard to see more than a few yards. There was no obvious figure, nothing I could point to, but the sound had been clear. Something had snapped a branch. I stood there quietly, letting my breath calm down. My ears strained for any follow-up noise. There was only silence again. It was frustrating. I felt like I was being toyed with. The late afternoon light was turning dull, and I realized I needed to keep moving if I wanted to get back to my car before dark. I started walking faster, pushing aside low branches and tall weeds. The path was faint in some places, and I had to rely on a few worn markers on trees to guide me. Now and then I stumbled on roots that jutted out of the ground. As I went deeper I thought about turning back, but I also knew the shortest way out was to finish the loop. Turning back would take me longer. The tension in my gut made me want to hurry, but I forced myself to keep a steady pace. My breathing was getting heavier, not from exhaustion but from a constant sense of dread. My ears kept picking up, clenching. I wondered if I should try calling out, see if maybe there was someone else around, but the idea of making noise didn't sit right with me. Instead I kept going in silence, occasionally glancing over my shoulder. Then I heard another snap, louder than before. It came from my left. This time it sounded like something heavy stepping on a thick piece of dead wood. My body tensed. I raised my flashlight. Even though it was still light enough to see, I caught a glimpse of bushes moving, but I couldn't see a shape or a figure. I took a deep breath and forced myself to walk forward. Another noise followed, a crunch of leaves coming from the right side. Now my skin prickled. I turned my head but saw only the outlines of tree trunks. I stepped faster, almost tripping on a root. My mind was racing with questions. Was something circling me? Was it just my imagination? My heart pounded in my chest and I felt sweat Trickling down my back, the path curved around a large rock formation, creating a blind corner. I slowed down. The last thing I wanted was to turn that corner and run into something. I crept forward, flashlight in hand, shining it near the rock's edge. The beam caught moss and scattered leaves, but no movement. I stepped around the rock. The trail ahead looked clear, just more trees and brush. Still I felt exposed. My body wanted to run, but my brain insisted on caution. I forced myself to keep a steady stride. My breathing was shallow and my muscles felt tight. The tension in my neck was giving me a headache. I could feel my pulse in my temples. I tried to focus on each step, thinking if I stayed calm, maybe I'd hear something move again, but everything was quiet. That silence was worse than the noise. It left me imagining all sorts of things in the corner of my mind. About another quarter-mile passed before I saw the next odd sign. A cluster of branches lay broken on the trail. They were thicker than my wrist. They looked fresh, with the inner wood still moist and pale. It was like something had snapped them recently and just tossed them aside. I looked around for footprints, but I only saw my own. The trees on both sides were dense and the ground was layered with old leaves. I felt my adrenaline spike again. The hair on my arm stood up and my breath caught in my throat. I tried to gather my thoughts and made myself keep moving. Another snap echoed behind me after a few steps, this time sounding more deliberate, like a foot pressing down on something. My hand shook a bit, so I tightened my grip on the flashlight to steady them. I turned around, shining the light back down the trail. Empty. My stomach was in knots. I took one step backward, then another. I didn't see anything, but I could feel that presence. It was like the air was heavier around me. I told myself to move, so I turned and marched forward faster. Now my breath was coming in short bursts. Each time I thought about stopping, I felt that heavy sensation behind me. It was like being followed by a shadow. I couldn't see the trail sloped downward, which gave me some momentum. I slid on loose dirt, nearly falling a couple of times. My chest was heaving, but I didn't care. I wanted distance. I wanted out of those woods. After about 10 minutes of this urgent pace, I came across a small wooden sign marking the final stretch of the loop. Relief watch over me, but I couldn't relax yet. Darkness was setting. In the sky above was a mix of deep blues and grays. The tops of the trees swayed with a light breeze. I could see the path winding down to where my car was parked. I hurried on, still listening for more branches snapping. I didn't hear anything now, which almost felt worse. My legs were shaky. By the time I reached the trailhead, my car was alone in the dirt parking area. I unlocked the door with trembling hands. I glanced back at the tree line. Nothing moved. I slid into the driver's seat and shut the door, locking it. My chest rose and fell rapidly. I stared at the edge of the woods for a moment, half expecting to see a towering figure step out, but all I saw were trees and shadows. My fingertips tingled from how tense I'd been gripping my flashlight. I started the engine and backed out, trying not to look at the rearview mirror. Part of me wanted one last glimpse, just to confirm I wasn't imagining things, but my rational side went out. I drove away, keeping my eyes on the road. My mind replayed every broken branch, every heavy footstep, every giant print. The knot in my stomach loosened a bit once I got onto the main road, but my hands were still shaky on the steering wheel. I pulled into a gas station about 20 minutes later because I needed a moment to breathe and clear my head. I parked near the far side of the lot and cut the engine. My body felt exhausted, like I'd run a marathon. My shirt was damp with sweat clinging to my back and shoulders. I leaned my head against the steering wheel, trying to calm my breathing. The fluorescent lights of the gas station felt harsh, but in a weird way they were comforting. Normal life was happening all around me. Cars pulling in, people filling up their tanks, some folks walking in and out of the small convenience store. I looked down at my muddy boots and thought about the prints I saw. The memory of those massive footprints wouldn't leave me. I could still see the shape of them, the depth, the width. I could still feel the presence of something that shouldn't be there. I stepped out of the car to stretch my legs. A cool breeze brushed against my skin. My breath came a little easier. I checked my phone and saw a bunch of missed notifications, but I didn't open them. Instead, I just stood by my car for a minute, rubbing my neck. My muscles felt stiff and my head still throbbed a bit. I thought about whether I should tell someone about what happened. Then I realized I didn't have anything concrete to report. No actual sighting, no photo, nothing except big footprints in the mud and snapping branches that might have come from a large animal. I thought about heading back sometime in the future with better equipment, maybe a camera, but the idea of returning sent a shiver through me. I got back in my car and switched on the engine. As I pulled out of the station, I couldn't stop glancing at my mirrors, half expecting to see something looming in the distance, but there was nothing except the glow of street lights and passing cars. Traffic was light, and I made it home without any more strange incidents. When I reached my place, I parked out front and turned off the engine. I sat there for a moment, gazing at my front door. My house looked welcoming, with a small porch light casting a warm glow. I grabbed my gear and stepped onto the sidewalk. The neighborhood was quiet, but it felt different from the woods here. I could see everything around me. There were no tall trees blocking the sky. There were no hidden corners full of shadows. Inside, I placed my boots by the door and tossed my pack on a chair. My clothes stuck to me, so I peeled them off and changed into something dry. My body was still in that tense state, like an aftershock of adrenaline. I drank a glass of water in the kitchen, feeling the cool liquid soothe my dry throat. I thought about the enormous footprints and the snapping branches. I could still recall the cold mud under my fingertips when I examined that first print. I stood in my kitchen, eyes on the floor, replaying it all. I remembered the weight on my chest when I realized those footprints were real. My throat felt tight again. I decided to just stand under a hot shower for a while, hoping the steam would help me relax. But even as the water pounded my shoulders, I kept remembering the sounds and the silence, the weird silence that fell after each snap, as if something was waiting for me to react. I tried to focus on the present. I tried to feel the warmth of the water. Eventually, my heart rate settled to a more normal pace. That night, I lay in bed with the covers pulled around me. My window was cracked open, letting in a mild breeze. I listened to the typical noises of my neighborhood, an occasional car passing, the hum of distant air conditioning units. Every time I heard the slightest creak or rustle, my mind flashed back to those woods, my body tense, ready for something to come crashing through. But of course it never did. I must have drifted off at some point, because the next thing I remember is waking up to a dim morning light. I rolled out of bed, feeling aches in my muscles from all that tension the day before. I stood there for a second, rubbing my stiff neck. I felt a small wave of relief, realizing I was home safe and that the day ahead involved normal routines. But I still catch myself thinking about that trail. The image of those huge footprints is locked in my mind, the way they dwarfed my hand and boot, the way the branches kept snapping behind me when nothing was there. Sometimes I wonder if I should talk to a ranger or someone who knows more about wildlife in that area. Maybe they'd tell me it's just a large bear or some strange set of overlapping tracks. But I know what I saw. I know how those prints looked, and I know how it felt to hear something following me without seeing it. I haven't gone back. I might never go back, even if it was just my imagination. I can't shake the memory of that heavy presence in the trees, that moment of pure tension when I Realized I was not alone out there, and for now that's enough to keep me far away from that trail. I started that night feeling a dull ache in my legs. I had been on my feet for hours, pacing back and forth through the old subway tunnel. I worked alone, which gave me a sense of control. I liked the quiet, but something about that shift made my chest feel tight. I remember standing near the entrance of the tunnel, catching a whiff of stale air mixed with mold. The city had shut down this line a long time ago. My job was to make sure nobody snuck in to spray graffiti or steal copper. It was usually boring, but I got paid to be bored. That night the boredom broke into something else. I had my flashlight in one hand and a small radio clipped to my belt. The radio crackled sometimes, but not much chatter came through. I also carried a baton. I never needed it, still it made me feel better having it at my side. The place was damp. Water dripped from the ceiling in tiny streams. Each drop echoed against the concrete. The air smelled like rust and wet rock. I heard my own footsteps bounce off the curved wall. Sometimes I listened to my breathing just to keep track of time. The tunnel stretched out into darkness. The station platform behind me was lit by a couple of weak bulbs. Old posters hung on the walls, their corners peeling. No trains had run here for years. I like to remind myself of that, especially when weird noises popped up. I used to hear strange sounds every now and then, rats scurrying, wind rattling through small openings, water sloshing around. That was normal in a place like this, but that night there was something else. My shift started at 11 o'clock. By midnight I felt a chill, not the usual cold that rolled in from the tunnel, but a sharp sensation on the back of my neck. My hair stood up. I swung my flashlight around, scanning the tracks. I thought I saw a slight flicker of movement, like a shape drifting in the darkness. I walked closer. The smell changed. The musty odor turned heavier like wet cloth. My heart rate picked up. My palm started sweating against the flashlight handle. I told myself it was probably steam or maybe some dust kicked up by the breeze, but there wasn't any steady breeze in that tunnel, just occasional drafts. I reached the edge of the platform and aimed the beam down on the tracks. I saw a patch of fog hanging there about 20 feet away. It wasn't thick at first. It looked like a small cloud just hovering. I squinted, trying to figure out if there was a leak or maybe a burst pipe, but there was no water spraying, no hiss of steam. That fog just sat there. I felt uneasy. My stomach tightened and my jaw clenched. I thought about calling it in on my radio, but I didn't. I wasn't sure what I'd report. A floating patch of fog, nobody would care. I stepped down onto the tracks, careful not to twist my ankle. The ground was uneven. Bits of gravel crunched under my boots. The flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the concrete walls. My footsteps sounded louder than usual, and the distant drip of water seemed to fade. I heard my pulse in my ears. I tried to focus on the job. I told myself to check it out, see if it was a problem, then head back up. As I approached, the fog got denser. It swirled in a small circle, almost as if it was circling in place. I still heard nothing except my breathing, but something about it felt wrong. I felt the temperature drop. My breath came out in a faint mist. I lifted my free hand to rub my neck. The tension wouldn't go away. Then the whisper started. They were low at first, like a distant hum. I stopped walking and held my breath. The faint buzzing noise transformed into hushed voices. I couldn't make out words. It sounded like a swirl of breathy tones echoing off the walls. It made my skin crawl. I had goosebumps along my arms and I felt my stomach flip. I swung the flashlight around, searching for anyone who might be messing with me, but I saw no one. My heart pounded. I could taste adrenaline in my mouth. I tried to speak, but my voice cracked. I swallowed and forced out a question. "Hello, who's there?" My words echoed back, but there was no answer. The whispers continued. They rose and fell like waves, never forming a sentence. I moved the flashlight beam across the tracks, checking for any sign of a person. Nothing. The fog itself shifted, rotating in a slow spiral like it was alive. I felt pins and needles in my fingers. I stepped back, my knees felt shaky. I wanted to get out of there, but I also felt this pull to keep going. The job demanded I investigate. Maybe it was a chemical leak. Maybe it was some weird effect from the old ventilation system, but the wind direction inside that tunnel was subtle. It usually pushed from one side to the other, not in circles, and I had never seen or heard anything like those whispers. My throat felt dry and my breathing sped up. I took another step toward the fog. The whispers grew louder, though I still couldn't grasp any clear words. The sound seemed to vibrate in my ears. My chest tightened. I pointed my flashlight at the swirling mass. The beam cut through it, revealing little droplets of moisture suspended in the air, but then it moved. It drifted sideways against the faint breeze that usually blew through the tunnel. It moved in the opposite direction as though it had its own current. My spine tingled, my radio crackled. I jumped and nearly dropped my flashlight. I grabbed the radio and pressed the button. "This is Rick," I said. My voice came out shaky. "Everything's normal here," I lied. I released the button and waited. No response, just static. I tapped the radio a few times, but it stayed silent. The fog drifted further down the tracks, and I caught a whiff of something bitter in the air. It reminded me of old electronics or maybe burned plastic. It wasn't pleasant. My eyes started to water. I decided to follow it. I walked carefully, shining a light ahead. My footsteps sounded uneven. My breath felt shallow. The whispers pulsed in and out like they came from deep in the tunnel walls. Each time I tried to focus on them, I felt a slight headache build behind my eyes. My hands trembled, so I gripped the flashlight tighter. The baton at my belt felt useless. I had never thought about using it on fog. After about 30 foot, I realized I was moving deeper than I usually went. The overhead lights were far behind me. It was mostly darkness except for my flashlight beam. The rails gleamed a little in the light. The tunnel smelled more stagnant here. The water dripping from the ceiling sounded louder. My boots splashed through small puddles. I felt claustrophobic. The walls seemed closer. My heart pounded harder. The fog slowed, almost as if it was waiting for me. I closed the distance. The whispers rose, echoing in my skull. My mouth felt dry. I wanted to say something, but I didn't know what. My tongue felt stuck. That's when a sudden gust blew through the tunnel, pushing against my back. My jacket ruffled, and I heard grit skitter across the concrete, but the fog moved the other way, right into the wind's face. It was like it defied the current. I stopped and stared, my body tense. My instincts told me to back away, but I didn't move. I was too curious or too stupid to leave. I tried to wave my hand through the fog. I reached out slowly. My arm trembled the moment my fingertips touched that mist. I felt a shock, like static electricity snapping on my skin. I yanked my hand back. My heart jumped. The whispers flared in volume, then dropped again. They sounded upset or excited. I couldn't tell. My breathing turned ragged. I felt sweat trickle down my forehead and my stomach churned. I took a step back. My foot slipped on the wet rail and I nearly fell. The flashlight beam jerked around the walls, revealing graffiti tags and chipped paint. A loud clang echoed from somewhere behind me. I spun around, shining the light toward the noise. Nothing moved. I just saw the empty track. My pulse hammered in my ears. I turned back to the fog, but it was a few feet away now. It was drifting again, continuing deeper into the tunnel. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to turn around and call it okay and let the weird fog do its thing, but I couldn't just ignore it. It was my job to investigate. My mind raced with questions. Could there be a gas leak causing hallucinations? Could I be breathing some toxic fumes making me hear things? But the physical sensation of that static jolt felt too real to be my imagination. I forced myself forward, my Muscles felt stiff, my throat was tight each time the whispers rose, my scalp prickled. It sounded like multiple voices merging, but no single voice was clear. I wondered if I should cover my ears. I tried once, but that made the sound echo inside my head. It was worse, so I just kept walking, letting my flashlight guide me. The deeper I went, the darker it got. The overhead lights didn't reach this part. My beam cut through the space, but the shadows pressed in on the edges. The fog glowed a little when the light hit it. I smelled that bitter burned plastic scent again, and it made me cough. My eyes watered. I wiped my face with my sleeve. My legs felt wobbly. My mind kept telling me to be careful. The ground was slick and the rails were cold under my feet. I decided to try the radio again. I pressed the button. "Rick here," I said, my voice shaky. "I'm down the tunnel tracking some sort of fog." Strange whispers. "Has anyone else reported something like this?" I released the button. Static, then a faint click. I waited, but no response came, just a faint hiss. My heart sank. I clipped the radio back to my belt and wiped the sweat from my brow. The fog paused, rotating slowly near a bend in the tunnel. The curvature of the walls made the whispers bounce around in weird ways. I stepped closer, feeling my arms tense. My flashlight caught the swirling shapes in that mist. It wasn't any color in particular, just a gray, milky swirl, but it moved in patterns that seemed deliberate. I stared and my mouth went dry. The whispering rose to a new level. It echoed in my head and I felt an uncomfortable pressure. My ears popped, my temples throbbed. I clenched my jaw. My eyes darted around, searching for any normal explanation. I saw old cables hanging from the ceiling, water dripping in thick drops, and some rusted pipes along the walls. The fog hovered a foot off the ground, swirling in a lazy circle. Then it spread out, forming a thin sheet along the tracks. The whispering shifted in pitch like it was stretching. My body felt locked in place. My heartbeat pounded in my temples. I tried to breathe slowly, but my lungs raced. I took one shaky step forward. The wet gravel under my boot gave a crunch. Then out of nowhere the whispers surged, blasting me with a wave of sound. I stumbled. My flashlight flickered. I heard that static electricity crackle in the air. The hair on my arms rose. The fog whipped around as if caught in a sudden vortex. It spun faster, creating a small whirlwind of damp air. I braced myself against the wall, my fingertips pressed into the cold concrete. My chest felt tight. The spinning fog started gliding down the tunnel again, but faster this time. I forced my legs to move. The water dripped louder behind me. My breath came in ragged gasps. Part of me wanted to turn back and run. Another part couldn't let it go. I didn't want to be the guy who saw something strange and just quit. I had this urge to see it through, though I can't explain why. The tunnel sloped downward slightly. I slipped once or twice on the wet metal. Each time I almost dropped my flashlight. The whispering never stopped. Sometimes it faded a bit, but it always returned. My throat hurt, my body tense so hard that my shoulders ached. The baton clanked at my side with each step, reminding me I had no clue how to fight a fog. I pressed on. After another 30 or 40 yards the fog came to a halt. It hovered near a pile of old debris. There was an abandoned electrical box with wires sticking out, some broken wood planks, and a few old metal scraps. The place smelled like rotting metal, if that's even a thing. A bitter tang burned my nostrils. The whispers rose and fell, never forming anything I could understand. I inched closer, shining the light over the pile. My flashlight flickered again, like the battery was failing. I tapped it with my palm and it steadied. I saw nothing unusual in the debris except rust and dirt, but the fog circled above it, twisting in a slow spiral. I heard a faint crackle of electricity. My ears buzzed. I touched my ear, thinking maybe I was having a reaction to the environment, but the sound persisted, a soft popping hum. I held my breath and took another step. My throat tightened. The tension in my chest felt Like a band around my lungs, the whispering rose again, and I felt a strange pressure behind my eyes. I blinked hard, trying to clear my vision. The fog swirled faster, then stretched toward me. I saw it drifting closer like a creeping hand. My heart hammered, my hands trembled. I raised the baton instinctively, even though it was pointless. My flashlight beam shook on the concrete floor. Suddenly the radio crackled again. This time it blasted with static so loud I winced. I nearly dropped it. I pulled it off my belt and pressed the button, but I heard nothing but high-pitched interference. The fog whipped around, reacting to the noise. The voices changed pitch, rising higher. The sound vibrated through my teeth. I felt a jolt of panic. My breath caught in my throat. The pressure in the air felt stifling, like the oxygen had thinned out. I stumbled back. The debris clattered under my boot, and a piece of wood snapped. The sudden noise echoed in the tunnel. The fog recoiled, swirling away a few feet. I took the chance to back away, shining the light on the floor. To avoid tripping, my legs were shaky. I wanted to breathe fresh air again. My mouth was full of that bitter taste. My eyes burned. I coughed hard, struggling to catch my breath. I kept the flashlight on the fog, stepping backwards slowly. Each time I moved, it shifted, like it was deciding whether to follow. The whispering faded a bit, replaced by that distant drip and the hum of the radio static. My boots splashed in small puddles as I made my way back. My shoulders were sore from tension. I didn't realize I'd been clenching my teeth until my jaw started to ache. Eventually I reached a part of the tunnel where the overhead lights were still faintly visible. The air felt slightly less damp. I glanced over my shoulder, seeing the platform in the distance. Relief washed over me, but I still couldn't shake the tremors in my hands. I looked back at the fog. It lingered near that debris, swirling in place. The whispers stayed in my head, even though I couldn't hear them as clearly anymore. It felt like they had burrowed into my mind. I turned and hurried toward the platform. My flashlight caught streaks of graffiti and old posters along the walls. My boot slipped once or twice, but I kept my balance. I could still hear some faint whispering echo behind me, but it was distant now. My heart pounded in my chest, and my breathing was short and sharp. My lungs felt tight. I just wanted to get to the exit to find a patch of normal air. When I stepped onto the platform, I felt some relief, but I was still tense. I made my way up the short stairs and looked around. Everything looked the same as always: flickering lights, peeling posters, a few benches covered in dust. I reached for my radio again. I needed to call in something, even if it sounded crazy, but now the radio was dead. I tried turning it off and on, but nothing happened. No static, no signal, just silence. I wiped more sweat off my forehead. My clothes felt damp. I leaned against the wall, trying to steady my breathing. The station smelled stale, but it was better than that bitter odor in the tunnel. My mind was racing. I kept replaying the moment. The fog shocked me. The sound of those whispers, the sense that it was responding to me. I wasn't sure what to do next. I looked toward the dark mouth of the tunnel, half expecting the fog to come after me, but nothing emerged. I decided I had enough for one night. I walked over to the small security desk near the station's entrance. My keys clinked as I fumbled them out of my pocket. My hand shook. I unlocked the metal cabinet and found the old phone line. I picked it up and listened. The line had a dial tone. Thank God. I called my supervisor, told him there was a weird situation in the old tunnel. I mentioned fog and strange noises, nothing else. I didn't mention the whispers. I didn't say how scared I was. He sounded annoyed, but said he'd send someone to check the ventilation next week. That was it. I hung up, feeling unsatisfied. My heart was still pounding. I grabbed a bottle of water from my bag and drank half of it in one go. The water was lukewarm, but it helped calm me down. I paced around the station, glancing back at the tunnel now and then. I didn't see Any movement, the tension in my shoulders refused to leave. My mouth felt dry and sour. Eventually I decided to stay in the station area for the rest of my shift. I told myself that if the fog came out into the station I'd see it, I'd be able to call for help, but it stayed deep in the tunnel. Every so often I thought I heard a faint whisper from far away, but it could have been my imagination. My nerves were shot. I spent the last few hours of the shift keeping one eye on the corridor and one eye on my watch. Time crawled. When my relief finally arrived in the morning, I told him I had a long night. He just shrugged and asked if there were any problems. I said no major problems, just a weird fog. He laughed it off, said maybe the place was haunted. I forced a laugh, but I felt uneasy. I felt like something had shifted in that tunnel, and I had no idea what it was. I didn't see any clear shape, but I heard those whispers. I felt the static shock. I saw it move against the wind. I left that morning with my nerves still on edge. I couldn't shake the feeling that the fog was waiting in there, swirling, whispering, doing whatever it did. I didn't see a human figure. I just saw that strange floating mass, and it defied every explanation I had. I still think about it sometimes, how it moved against the wind and how it sounded like voices I couldn't understand. And I've worked that job a long time, but I've never seen anything like that before or since. I don't know if it will ever show up again, but I watch for it every night. I can't help it. That fog changed my routine now. Every step I take in that tunnel feels different. I don't know what it was, and I don't know if I want to find out. I'm going to cut straight to the point. I never expected to have an experience like this in my office building. I work for a small accounting firm in a place that looks like it was built decades ago. The walls in the hallways are worn, the paint is peeling in some corners, and the lighting feels outdated. We've got this old elevator at the end of the corridor that almost nobody uses. There's a newer one by the main entrance, so people usually stick to that. The older elevator just sits there with its rusty doors and flickering buttons. Sometimes I forget it even exists, but one night it reminded me that it's still around. It was late and I was the only person left on my floor. I had stayed after hours to finish some reports. That's when this entire thing started. I was at my desk shoving papers into a folder when I heard the elevator doors open down the hallway. It felt out of place because I knew that elevator isn't normally in service at night. I paused for a second, hoping to hear someone step out. No steps, no voices, nothing. I walked over to the door of my office and peeked into the hallway. The doors of that old elevator were wide open. It was the strangest sight. I glanced around to see if someone had pressed the button by accident, but I didn't see anyone. I stood there for a moment hesitating, then I decided to go check it out. My footsteps echoed in the quiet corridor. The lights overhead buzzed and cast a weak glow on the old walls. When I reached the elevator, I looked inside. The car was empty. The overhead light inside was flickering, and the control panel had a single button lit. It was for the floor I was already on. It made no sense. I looked around again and called out, "Hello, anyone here?" No answer. I don't usually stick my nose into weird situations, but something about that elevator pulled me in. I thought maybe somebody had gotten stuck or pressed the wrong button. It wouldn't have been the first time in that old building, but nobody responded. I stepped inside the elevator and looked around. The floor had some stains and the panel looked half broken. I didn't see signs of damage that would suggest a real malfunction, though. I pressed the open door button a couple of times, then leaned out and checked the hallway, still empty. Then I pressed the closed door button. The door slid shut and the light overhead flickered. I felt an odd pressure in my stomach, like something was off, but I tried to stay calm. The elevator gave a jerk like it was about to move, then it went dark for a second. The Lights came back on, but they were very dim, and then we started dropping. It wasn't a smooth descent, it was a rush that threw me against the wall. I was still on my own floor because the hallway layout looked identical, but the lights were out except for a few emergency lights near the ceiling. Everything was dark, the air was colder than usual, and a musty smell made me cover my nose. I looked around for the overhead bulbs that should have been on. Nothing. I tried to flip the light switch on the wall, but it did nothing. I recognized the shape of the hallway, but it felt wrong. The walls were shadowy and every door was closed. There was no sign of life, no hum of computers, no faint chatter from offices down the corridor. I walked over to my office door. It looked the same chip paint, same brass handle. I turned the handle, but it was locked. I knocked, but there was no response. I listened for movement, but it was silent. My heart was racing, but I tried to stay steady. I told myself maybe the power had gone out or the building was on some sort of after hour setting, but I'd never seen the place like this. It wasn't just dim, it felt abandoned. My eyes were adjusting to the darkness. The corridor stretched out, lit by a few emergency lights that gave everything a dull grayish tone. I pulled out my phone to use its flashlight. The battery was at half, but the screen showed no signal. That wasn't normal. I usually get some coverage even in the old elevator. I tried calling a friend, but the call failed. I sighed and turned on the floor flashlight at the beam, cut through the darkness, revealing scuffed floors and walls that looked older than they should. I headed toward the stairwell. If nothing else, I figured I could walk down the stairs and find a security guard or a janitor on a lower floor. My footsteps echoed, and every little noise made me pause. The building was silent, but my own breathing was loud. I reached the stairwell door and gave it a push. It wouldn't budge. I tried again, harder this time. The handle wouldn't turn. I banged on it and it rattled, but it stayed locked. I cursed under my breath, feeling a jolt of frustration and unease. The idea that I might be stuck on a floor that looked like my own but seemed abandoned was freaking me out. I felt the hair on the back of my neck stand up. There was no sound from the other side of that door, no sign of any security staff or cleaning crew. I pointed my phone's flashlight around and spotted a small sign that said electrical room. It was on a door. I'd SE a few times before I walked over, tried the handle and found it unlocked. I stepped in. It was a cramped utility space filled with breaker panels and dusty shelves. I aimed the flashlight at the boxes on the wall, looking for a main switch or something that could explain why the floor was in near total darkness. Most of the breakers were in the on position. I tried flipping a few, but nothing happened. The lights outside stayed off. My phone's flashlight was all I had. The only sound was my own breathing. I left the electrical room and went back into the hallway. My shoes made a dull squeaking noise on the worn linoleum. I figured I should try the other offices. Maybe I'd find a landline or a working phone somewhere. The first door I tried was locked. The second two, I jiggled the handles, knocked and listened. Silence each time. When I got to the conference room door, I managed to open it. Inside, the furniture was the same as I remembered. A long table, chairs, a whiteboard on the wall, but there was a thin layer of dust on everything. The windows were there, but I couldn't see any lights from outside. It was just blackness. I leaned in closer to the glass to see if maybe the city lights were just blocked by something, but I saw nothing. No cars, no street lamps, no moon. It was as if the building was floating in the middle of nowhere. My pulse was racing again. The silence felt suffocating. I thought maybe the best thing to do was to go back to the elevator and see if I could get it to move to a different floor. If I could at least get to the lobby, I might find the main exit unlocked. I hurried back toward the spot where I stepped off. On the way, I checked another office. It was also locked. I felt a tightness in my chest. The place felt dead, but not in the sense that I smelled decay or anything like that. It was just empty and cold. My fingertips felt numb when I got to the elevator doors. They were closed. I pressed the button. Nothing happened. I tried to pry the doors open with my fingers, but they wouldn't budge. My phone's battery was draining from using the flashlight, so I turned it off for a moment and stood there in the dark. My heart was pounding again, and I realized I was sweating even though the air felt chilly. I told myself to stay calm, but my mind was racing. I decided to call out, "Hello." My voice sounded shaky. No reply. I felt like I was in a giant empty box with no sign of an exit. I moved down the hallway to see if the bathrooms might be open. They were. The men's room door creaked when I pushed it inside. The smell of old disinfectant hung in the air. My phone flashlight revealed 2 sinks, a mirror, and 3 stalls. I turned it to check if there was water, and a weak stream trickled out. I splashed some on my face, trying to stay alert. The water felt cold. My reflection in the mirror looked pale. My eyes were wide. I felt a surge of anxiety. I turned off the faucet and rubbed my hands on my pants to dry them. I left the bathroom and walked to the far side of the floor. I found more locked offices in a break room with a small fridge and a microwave. The fridge wasn't running, so it felt warm inside. There was a stale odor when I opened it. I checked the time on my phone. Only a few minutes had passed since ID first arrived on this deserted floor, but it felt longer. I tried the phone again. No signal. I decided to check the main doors to see if they connected to the hallway leading to the new elevator. I headed there, passing by the locked offices again. My footsteps echoed more than before. I saw the reception area. They were partially open. I stepped through and found the reception desk in darkness. The phone on the desk was there, but it had no dial tone. I checked all the lines dead. I lifted the receiver, pressed a few buttons, and heard nothing. I felt tension in my shoulders and my neck was stiff. I couldn't shake the sensation that I was trapped in some sort of loop. I walked around the reception desk and pointed my flashlight at the glass doors that usually led to the elevator bank. They weren't glass anymore. They were just dark sliding doors that appeared jammed. There was no reflection, no light from the other side. I pressed my shoulder against them, but they wouldn't move. I shone my flashlight in the gap. I saw a solid black void, like there was nothing there. I felt my stomach turn. I backed away and tried to breathe slowly. My phone screen flashed a low battery warning. I turned off the flashlight again to conserve what was left standing in the darkness. I kept thinking of that drop in the elevator. My stomach tightened at the memory. I didn't remember passing any floors or hearing the normal dings. The elevator just dropped and then stopped. Now everything here felt disconnected from the rest of the world. I needed a plan. I decided to return to the elevator doors I'd stepped out of and keep trying to pry them open. If that failed, I'd look for some tool in the break room or the electrical room. On my way back, I felt the hair on my arms stand up again. I could almost sense the emptiness pressing in from all sides. My breath sounded too loud. I reached the elevator doors and checked for any kind of release latch. The panel on the side was sealed. I tried the button again, no response. I crouched down and tried to grab the doors at the bottom, hoping to wedge my fingers in and pull them apart. They wouldn't move. I was getting frustrated. My legs were shaky from the adrenaline. I stood up and turned on my phone flashlight. My battery was at 10%. I aimed the light around the edge of the elevator doors, looking for anything to grip. That's when I heard a faint click. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make me freeze. I spun around, shining the flashlight down the hallway. I saw a door at the far end that was now open. It had been closed a few minutes before. It looked like one of the offices. I swallowed hard. I Wasn't sure if I was relieved to see a sign of movement or terrified. My pulse spiked. I walked toward that door, shining my flashlight. As I went, every step felt heavy. When I reached the doorway, I peered inside. The office was dark, but the door was cracked open. I couldn't see anyone moving. "Hello," I asked. No response. I stepped into the room. My phone's beam scanning the space. It was a small office with a desk, a couple of chairs, and a file cabinet. The drawers on the cabinet were slightly open. There was a flicker of movement behind the desk, just a shifting shadow. I stepped closer and realized it was my own reflection in a window. There was no one there. I inspected the desk. It had a phone, but it was unplugged. There was a laptop, but no power cord. I tried the power button and nothing happened. I felt a wave of disappointment. The file cabinet drawers were empty except for some old forms. My phone buzzed with another low battery alert. I had 5% left. I needed to think quickly. I turned to leave the office and then I heard the elevator ding. That soft tone echoed in the hallway. My chest tightened. I sprinted back to the hallway, my footsteps pounding against the floor. When I reached the elevator, the doors were open. The light inside was flickering the same way it had before. I didn't see anyone come out. I paused for a second, feeling that rush of uncertainty. Then I decided to go for it. I stepped inside. The panel was lit again. I pressed the button for the lobby. The doors closed and the car shook, but it didn't drop this time. It felt like it was moving slowly upward, which was odd. If I wanted to go to the lobby, I clenched my fists and just waited. After a few moments, the doors opened. I stepped out. My heart pounded as I looked around. I was on my original floor, but the lights were on this time. It looked normal. I could see the light in my office. The hallway had the usual fluorescent glow. Everything seemed like it had never changed. I glanced back at the elevator. The doors closed behind me, and that was it. No rush of air, no flickering lights, just the same old elevator, silent and still. I heard a cleaning crew vacuuming down the corridor. I hurried toward the sound and saw the janitor. He looked up at me and asked if I was okay. I wanted to explain everything, but I realized how it would sound. Instead, I just said I was feeling a bit dizzy and needed to get home. I made my way to the newer elevator, rode it down to the lobby, and left the building. I didn't see anything strange on the way out. The security guard nodded as I passed, not suspecting anything odd. That night I didn't sleep well. My mind replayed that drop in the deserted floor. In the morning I came to work and everything looked normal. Nobody mentioned a power outage or any weird event. The old elevator was still there, but I avoided it. I finished my paperwork and tried to focus on my usual tasks, but every time I heard an elevator chime, my stomach did a flip. I haven't gone near that old elevator since, and I plan to keep it that way. I don't know what happened or why, but I know what I felt. That's enough to keep me away. I noticed the stain the first day I moved into my new loft. It was late afternoon when the movers left, and I was leaning against the living room wall to catch my breath. My eyes drifted across the open floor space, then up to a dark, wet patch on the far wall. It stood out like a shadow against the white paint. At first I thought it was just a sloppy remnant from the previous tenant, but I kept staring at it and a weird feeling crept into my chest. It looked like a person's outline, a head, shoulders and torso all slightly blurred around the edges. I shook it off. I told myself it was just water damage, no big deal, but something about it made me uneasy right away. I remember setting down my toolbox and walking over to touch that spot. It felt cool and damp. I wiped my hand on my jeans and noticed a slight musty smell in the air. The rest of the wall felt dry, just that silhouette felt different. I shrugged and told myself I'd deal with it after I settled in, but I couldn't get it out of my mind. The second day I woke up early to unpack some boxes and figure out my plan for Renovations. My job situation allowed me to work from home most days, so I wanted to turn a corner of the loft into a small office, but I had to get rid of that stain first. I walked into the living room expecting to see it in the same spot it wasn't. I stopped in my tracks and stared at the wall. The silhouette was a couple of feet higher, close to the ceiling. I actually walked around the entire open space to see if my eyes were playing tricks on me, but the difference was obvious before. The outline was near the middle of the wall. Now it stretched near the top. The shape still looked like a person, except it was kind of leaning forward. I noticed a faint discoloration on the floor right beneath it, like some drops of water had fallen there overnight. My stomach twisted. I couldn't explain it. I touched the spot again, still damp, still cold, but now it was almost a foot above my head. I tried calling the building manager, but they didn't pick up. I tried calling a friend, but I didn't want to sound paranoid, so I hung up before the call connected. I grabbed a notebook and jotted down the time and the location of the stain. I wanted proof that I wasn't losing my mind that evening. I double-checked. The shape was lower on the wall, near waist level. The outline seemed more pronounced. I ran my hands along the edges, feeling a slight groove or texture in the paint. The smell was stronger to it. Reminded me of wet concrete. I found some leftover white paint in the storage closet along with a roller and a paint tray. I laid out a drop cloth and started painting right over the stain. I figured I'd seal it up, maybe apply some mold-resistant primer later. As I worked, my arms got tired and I felt this odd sense of dread, but I kept going. By the time I finished, the shape was hidden under a fresh coat of paint. I let out a long breath and decided that was enough for one day. The next morning I woke up anxious to see how the wall looked. I walked straight to it before even starting my coffee. The spot had returned. It was faint, but it was back. The new paint hadn't even dried completely in some sections, yet the outline was there right in the middle of the wall. It looked a little bigger too. I dropped my phone on the floor when I saw it. I let out a shaky laugh. I told myself it was some kind of moisture problem coming from the other side of the wall. Maybe the building's piping had a leak. I dialed a local handyman and asked him to come by. The next day I spent the day trying not to look at the wall. I set up my desk near the window and worked on my laptop. Every so often I'd glance over and see that shape. It felt like it was watching me, but I knew that was in my head. Still, I couldn't help but notice the outline shifting positions by the hour. By late afternoon it was higher again, almost near the ceiling. By dinner time it was closer to the floor. I felt a tightness in my chest and a tingling in my arms. I walked outside onto the small balcony to get fresh air. There was traffic noise below and neon signs across the street, and for a moment I felt better, but I couldn't relax. I went back inside and tried to keep busy. I cleaned the kitchen, rearranged some boxes, and avoided looking at that wall until it was time to sleep. The handyman showed up around noon the next day. He was a big guy with a thick beard and calloused hands. He tapped the wall with a small hammer and listened to the echo. He pressed his ear against it and shrugged. Then he cut a small square of drywall where the silhouette was most visible. He used a flashlight to look inside. I stood beside him, feeling sweaty and nervous. He scratched his head and said the interior looked dry. He didn't see any pipes in that section, no major cracks, no mold. He patched up the square and told me he couldn't figure it out. He suggested I call a specialist or maybe the building manager. Then he left. After he was gone I touched the fresh patch. It looked good, but the moment I took my hand away I saw the faint outline again. I felt my heart pound. My palms got clammy. I decided to grab some lunch and clear my head. I ended up eating a sandwich at a nearby cafe. My hand shook a bit as I lifted my cup. I kept replaying The handyman's words in my mind. There was no explanation for this stain, yet there it was, moving around and returning after new paint or fresh patches. That evening I tried repainting the entire wall. I bought heavy-duty primer, the kind that's designed to cover tough stains. I opened the windows to air out the place, then rolled on 2 thick coats. I took my time. I listened to music to distract myself. At some point I found myself glancing over my shoulder every few seconds. I felt like I was being watched. I felt goosebumps on my arms. The paint was smooth and clean. When I finished, I waited a couple of hours, then walked around the loft to admire my work. No silhouette in sight. I took a deep breath and let myself feel a small bit of relief. Around midnight I woke up to get a glass of water. The loft was dark except for a street lamp glow coming through the windows. I walked into the living room and I almost dropped my glass. The silhouette was back. It was faint, but it stretched across the lower half of the wall. My mouth felt dry and my heart hammered against my rib cage. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt tight. I approached the stain slowly. It looked the same, like a person leaning forward. I reached out a shaky hand and the wall felt damp and cold again. I flipped on the lights. The outline was clearer in the artificial light, darker around the edges. My breathing got rapid. My skin tingled and I felt a wave of nausea. I couldn't stand to look at it anymore, so I turned the lights off and went back to bed. I tossed and turned for hours. I thought about weird possibilities. Maybe it was some kind of hidden mold that formed patterns, or maybe the previous tenant had done something to the wall. I tried to rationalize, but none of it made sense. Over the next several days I tracked the stain's movement. Every morning it would be near the ceiling. By mid-afternoon it would be closer to the center of the wall. By late evening it would settle near the floor. It never disappeared completely. I felt restless. I felt my stress levels spike each time I glanced at it. My back muscles tightened and I started having headaches. I called the building manager, but he told me to open a maintenance request through their online system. I did, but nobody responded. I tried calling a specialized mold inspection team, but they quoted a high price just for an initial visit. I agreed, thinking I needed answers. When the inspector arrived, he brought all sorts of equipment. He measured humidity, checked the temperature, and used a special camera to detect moisture behind the walls. I stood beside him, crossing my arms, waiting for results. His face stayed neutral as he moved around the loft. Finally, he told me everything looked normal. He saw no major moisture intrusion, no sign of a leaking pipe. He told me the building was old, so maybe some minor seepage was happening, but he didn't see anything that would cause such a distinct shape. He left, shaking his head. Another dead end. At that point I started feeling paranoid. I avoided the living room and did my work from the bedroom, but I couldn't help checking the silhouette a few times a day. Each time it was in a different spot. Each time I felt a jolt in my chest, like an electric shock. I started losing sleep. I'd wake up in the night, step into the living room, and find the stain near the floor, creeping toward the corner. My eyes would water and my hands would tremble. My mind was stuck on this idea that something was in my loft, but I couldn't see it except for that damp outline on the wall. I tried to dehumidify her. I placed it near the wall and let it run day and night. It filled up with water and I entered it twice a day. The air felt drier, but the silhouette stayed. Sometimes it looked smaller, sometimes wider, but it never left. I bought more paint, more primer. I tried a sealant. The shape always came back within a few hours. The smell got stronger on some days, weaker on others. I tried opening all the windows and doors to let everything air out. The stain would fade, but it never fully vanished. One evening I sat on the couch across from the wall, just staring at it. My arms were crossed tightly and my leg kept bouncing with nervous energy. The shape was near the bottom with its arm-like contour reaching outward. I leaned forward and squinted. I thought I saw the outline shift slightly like a twitch. My heart drummed in my chest. I felt adrenaline surge in my veins and a prickling heat crawled up my neck. I jumped up and grabbed a flashlight. I shone the beam on the wall, but the shape just looked like a regular damp stain. Again, my heart rate was out of control and I had to sit down gasping for air. I decided to sleep in a hotel that night. I gathered a small bag of clothes, locked up and walked out to the street. My body felt tense and my hands shook when I started my car at the hotel. I spent half the night staring at the ceiling, wondering what was happening back in my loft. Was the silhouette moving around the walls? Was it creeping along the floor? I didn't get much rest, but at least I was away from it. The next morning I forced myself to return. I opened the door and walked in slowly. The loft smelled stale. The silhouette was right back in the middle of the wall, arms and torso defined. I tried not to stare, but I couldn't help it. I turned on all the lights, opened the curtains, and let the sunshine pour in. I stepped closer, feeling my muscles tightening again. I laid my hand on the wall. It felt damp to the touch. When I pressed my ear against it, I heard a faint drip sound behind the surface, but it was irregular, like a few drops of water falling from time to time. There was no pipe there, though everyone told me that I called a drywall specialist, an electrician, and even a plumber. One by one they told me everything looked normal. The plumber said he saw no sign of leaks in the building main lines. The electrician checked for wiring issues that might cause some condensation, but he found nothing. I watched them work, feeling more frustrated every day. My fists clenched and my neck muscles HDHD from stress. I ended up walking the halls of the building asking neighbors if they had a similar problem. They just looked at me like I was crazy. A few said they had some minor leaks in their bathrooms or kitchens, but nobody had a moving Select W on their wall. Weeks passed and my routine became a cycle of anxiety. I'd wake up, check the stain, see it near the ceiling. I'd work for a few hours, glance up, find it halfway down. By evening it was near the floor. I'd paint over it or plaster it and it would always come back. I felt like I was chasing something that slipped away every time I reached out. My nights were filled with tossing and turning, half expecting to hear footsteps or voices in the loft, but there was only silence, broken by the occasional drip sound behind the wall. Now, as I sit here on the couch typing these words on my laptop, the silhouette is on my left. It's about eye level, maybe a few feet away. The edges look darker tonight. There's a faint smell of damp concrete again. My pulse is racing and I can't seem to calm down. I feel the tension in my chest and the dull throbbing in my temples. My hands keep shaking every time I look at the shape. I feel a surge of adrenaline and a tightness in my stomach. I plan to call the building manager again in the morning. If he won't help me, I'll call more inspectors or even a structural engineer. I don't know what else to do. I don't have a logical explanation for a stain that moves around the wall like this, but I can't live with it. I don't know if it's some bizarre moisture phenomenon, a strange building defect, or something else entirely. All I know is that it makes my skin crawl. I can't concentrate. My appetite is gone. I keep thinking about that shape-shifting position every few hours, never going away. I'm going to try one more thing tonight. I bought a can of industrial sealant that's meant for basement walls. It's thick and strong smelling, but if anything can block moisture, that stuff should do it. I'm going to apply it right after I finish typing. I'm getting up now. I'm rolling up my sleeves, opening the can and pouring it into a tray. I'm brushing it on, carefully covering the entire section of wall where the shape appears. My arms are tired and my eyes are stinging from the fumes, but I'm pushing through. I can't leave any gaps. I have to See if this works. It's done. The wall is glistening with a fresh layer of sealant. I'm standing back to inspect my work. I'm sweating and my lungs feel tight from the chemical smell. I'm leaving all the windows open tonight, but I'll stay here. I need to see the result in the morning. Right now the shape is gone under the sealant. I'm just hoping it stays. That way my stomach's in knots and my head is pounding. I just want one night of peace. I'm sitting on the edge of my bed typing this, feeling my chest tighten with dread. I'll try to get some sleep. If I can't, I'll just sit here listening to the sounds outside. Maybe I'll hear that dripping again. Maybe the wall will stay quiet. I don't know. I feel the tension in my body and I want to scream, but I hold it in. There's no one to hear me anyway. All I can do is wait and see what tomorrow brings. If I wake up and see that silhouette again, I don't know what my next move will be, but I'm too exhausted to think about it for now. I'll just lie down, close my eyes and hope I don't see it in my dreams. I got back home around 2 in the morning, completely drained from a long drive. My eyes were bloodshot, my neck felt stiff, and all I wanted was to crawl into bed. As soon as I pulled into the garage, I noticed something strange on my car's side mirror. It looked like a handprint with long thin fingers. The shape was clear, like someone with an odd hand had pressed it there. I blinked a few times, hoping my fatigue was playing tricks on me, but the print stayed right where it was. My stomach tightened. I don't see handprints on my mirrors that often, especially ones that look so slim. I grabbed a rag from a shelf next to the garage door and wiped it off. The imprint came away easily, so I figured maybe it was some smudge from my trip. I didn't dwell on it too long. I walked inside, locked the door, and took a quick shower before falling asleep. I didn't think about the handprint again until the next morning. I woke up feeling a bit stiff, but otherwise fine. I drank some coffee in the kitchen and went to the garage to check something in the trunk. I didn't plan to drive anywhere, but I still wanted to make sure I had unpacked everything. That's when I saw the same imprint on the mirror again, in the exact same position as before. It was that, but firmly against the glass. My chest felt tight and I just stood there staring at it. I glanced around the garage. The air smelled stale and there wasn't much light. Because the overhead fluorescent was turned off, I could only see by the dim daylight filtering in from a small window in the corner. I stood there for a while trying to figure out how this mark could have returned when I hadn't moved the car at all. I took a closer look at the garage door to see if there were any signs of forced entry. It's an old single car door with a simple chain mechanism. Everything looked normal. The lock was still intact. There was dust along the bottom undisturbed. I tried to breathe slowly, but I felt my pulse picking up. I wiped the mirror again. My hand shook a little because I was spooked. Then I checked the rest of the car. I ran my hand along the doors, the trunk and the hood. I didn't see any other marks or scratches. I didn't see footprints on the floor. It was just that weird handprint back again. Less than 8 hours after I'd wiped it away, I told myself it might be some condensation that made a pattern. Maybe the mirror glass or the temperature caused it, but the shape was too precise. I could see individual finger lines narrower than mine but longer. I went back inside and tried to push the thought out of my head. I spent the day cleaning my living room and sorting laundry. I blasted music to keep my mind off the mirror situation. I tried to ignore a small knot in my stomach that refused to go away. I kept telling myself there had to be a normal explanation. Maybe I had pressed my own hand against it without realizing, but deep down I knew my hand wasn't shaped like that. Late that afternoon I walked outside to throw some trash in the bin. The sun was setting and the temperature was dropping. I heard a faint scraping sound near the garage door, like something dragged across the concrete. My scalp prickled. I Stopped in my tracks listening. The sound came again, but softer this time. I walked over to the garage door and pressed my ear against it. I couldn't hear anything except my own breathing. I opened the side door to the garage and peered inside. It was dim and quiet with a faint gasoline odor from my lawnmower. I flicked on the overhead light. Everything looked the same as before. The car sat there. The mirror was still smudge-free from my second cleaning. I checked the corners of the garage, behind some boxes and around my tool rack. Nothing seemed out of place. I shut off the light and locked the side door. My heart was pounding a little, but I told myself it was just me being jumpy. I had no proof anyone else had been in there. It was probably the garage door settling or some wind passing through the small cracks. I tried to brush it off and went back inside. That evening I had dinner in front of the TV. I kept checking the windows, half expecting to see a face staring back, but there was nothing around 11. I got ready for bed. I felt uneasy, so I double-checked that all the doors were locked. Then I stood at the door leading to the garage and listened. Everything was silent. I switched off the lights and went to my bedroom. I had trouble sleeping. My mind kept drifting to that handprint. I imagined a person with extra long fingers pressing their palm against my car mirror in the middle of the night. I tried to ignore the scenario, but the idea lingered in my head. At some point I must have dozed off, but I woke up again around 3. In the morning I thought I heard a dull thud somewhere in the house. My throat felt dry. I got out of bed and crept through the hallway, trying not to make any noise. The floor creaked under my feet and every sound felt magnified in the stillness. I listened for any movement, but the house was quiet. I went to the kitchen, grabbed a flashlight from the drawer and carefully opened the garage door. The darkness inside the garage seemed heavier than usual. I flipped the light switch and the fluorescent tube flickered on. Everything looked normal at first. Then I shone the flashlight around, checking corners. A part of me expected to see footprints or something, but the floor just had old oil stains and dust. I walked up to the mirror again. I felt my heartbeat in my throat as I aimed the flashlight at the glass. The same handprint was there, exactly like before. I swear I felt a chill go through my entire body. I flashed the beam around, looking for anything that could have caused it. Then I wiped it off for the third time in less than 24 hours. My hand was trembling. My breathing was shallow. I thought maybe someone was messing with me. I decided to lock the car doors, even though I was sure that wouldn't stop someone from touching the mirror again. I left the garage and locked it from the inside. I didn't sleep much the rest of that night. I just lay in bed listening to the faint hum of the fridge from the kitchen and waiting for something else to happen. When I finally got up in the morning, I hesitated before going to the garage. I stared at the door for a long time, trying to decide if I even wanted to see that handprint again. My curiosity won out. When I stepped inside, I actually felt relieved for a second because the mirror looked clean. I walked over to the car and ran my hand across the glass to confirm there was no new mark. I breathed out and felt my shoulders relax. I checked the trunk, the interior, and around the car for signs of tampering. Nothing else was unusual. That relief didn't last long. In the afternoon, I started hearing a tapping noise against the garage door. It was gentle and spaced out, like someone was softly knocking every minute or so. I pressed my ear against the door once again, but I couldn't identify any words or footsteps, just that tap, tap, tap. My pulse raced and my palms got sweaty. I walked to the front door of the house, opened it, and went around to the driveway to see if anyone was standing by the garage nobody was there, the driveway was empty and the street was quiet. I rubbed my forehead, feeling a dull headache coming on. I walked back inside, locked the front door, and tried to distract myself. That evening I couldn't relax. I tried watching a movie, but I kept pausing it to listen for any sounds. I ate a quick dinner without tasting much of it. By 11 o'clock my nerves were shot. I decided I needed some kind of plan. I rummaged through a closet and found an old security camera I'd bought a few years ago. It was one of those simple wireless models. I set it up to face the car mirror. It had a motion sensor that would start recording when something moved. I tested it a few times to make sure it worked. Then I turned off the lights, closed the garage door and went inside. I tried to stay awake, waiting to see if the camera would send any alert to my phone. I guess I nodded off around midnight because the next thing I knew my phone buzzed. It was almost 2. In the morning again my heart pounded as I checked the alert. The app showed motion detected in the garage at 1:47 a.m. I opened the live feed. It was dark, so I switched to the recorded footage. I saw the image of my car in black and white, lit by the camera's night vision. Suddenly there was a glitch and the feed cut out for a split second. When it came back, I could see the side mirror. A faint shape passed over it, but it was too blurry to identify. It wasn't a person's silhouette. It looked more like a haze or a shadow drifting across. Then the feed went dark for a moment. When it came back on, the mirror had a smear like someone had just touched it. My breathing got rapid, my scalp tingled. I felt cold sweat trickle down my back. I grabbed a baseball bat from my closet and marched to the garage door. My legs were shaking and my mouth was dry, but I needed to see it for myself. I yanked open the door and flicked on the light. The mirror had the same imprint again. The camera was still there, pointed at the car, but I noticed something off about it. The camera's lens was smeared with the same kind of residue that looked like the handprint. My chest tightened. I wiped the lens with a rag, but the imprint on the mirror remained until I wiped that too. I stood in the garage, breathing hard, listening to the buzzing of the fluorescent light. I felt like someone was watching me, but there was nowhere to hide. The corners of the garage were empty, just stacks of boxes and a metal shelving unit with tools. I checked outside again, but didn't see anyone. I spent the rest of the night on the couch in my living room, the baseball bat by my side. My mind kept replaying that recording. I didn't see a clear figure, just that shadow or haze, then the handprint. By morning I was exhausted. My hands shook from lack of sleep and my eyes felt gritty. I went to the garage one last time, half expecting to see the print again. The mirror was clean from when I'd wiped it. I looked around the concrete floor for footprints or marks, but I didn't see anything. I locked up and decided to stay away from the garage for the rest of the day. I felt jumpy every time the house creaked or the wind blew against the windows. By late afternoon I realized I needed to figure out what was going on. Maybe I'd call a friend to come over, or maybe I'd get someone to change the locks, but I couldn't think straight and I still felt exhausted. I sat in the living room with the TV turned to some random channel just to have background noise. My mind kept returning to the image of that handprint. I stared at my own hands, comparing them to what I'd seen. My fingers are average, not skinny or elongated. My palm doesn't look like that shape. I felt a shiver just thinking about it. As night came, I decided I would try to stay awake one more time. With the camera rolling, I set up a second camera on a different angle so I'd have two views of the garage. I made sure my phone was charged, and I kept my bat within reach. I turned off the lights and locked every door. Then I sat in my armchair in the living room staring at my phone screen waiting for an alert. My eyes felt heavy and my body was tired, but I forced myself to stay conscious, taking sips of cold water to shock my system whenever I felt sleepy. At around 1:55 a.m. my phone buzzed again. Motion detected in the garage. My heart raced, my mouth went dry. I braced myself and opened the live feed. The screen showed both camera angles. For a split second there was movement near the car. It was blurry like a fluttering shape. Then, just like before, the feed flickered. When it came back I saw the same type of haze pass over the mirror. That was it. No person, no animal, just this movement that didn't make any sense. I waited a few moments, then I grabbed the bat and walked straight to the garage. I turned on the light. The mirror was streaked again with that same handprint. My stomach twisted. I wiped it off, my arm shaking from adrenaline. The rest of the garage looked normal, empty. I checked behind the car, under it, and even in the storage boxes. No one was there. I stood there, my breath coming in short gasps. I couldn't find any logical explanation. Something was marking my mirror, but I couldn't see how or why. I walked back inside and locked the door. It was almost 3. When I finally tried to sleep, I stared at the ceiling in my bedroom, listening for any noise, but everything was quiet. I haven't had a full night's rest since this started. The handprint hasn't shown up again for a couple of days, but I still jump at every sound. I don't know if someone is messing with me or if something else is going on. I just know that every time I see that mark I feel my heart pounding and my skin crawling. I haven't told anyone yet. I'm not sure they'd believe me, but I can't forget that shape on the mirror and how it keeps showing up no matter what I do. Every night I lie awake expecting to hear another scrape or tap. I haven't decided what my next move is, but I can't keep living like this for now. All I can do is wait and see if the handprint comes back, and every time I step into that garage my chest tightens and I feel like I'm never alone in there. I never thought I'd be nervous about a closet. I'm not the kind of person who believes in spirits or hidden presences, but right now I feel uneasy every time I look at those sliding doors. It started as a small harmless noise, a little creaking. When the temperature changed I used to laugh it off. I told myself it was just wood reacting to the heat or the cold. Then something changed. The sounds got stranger. I began hearing low moans like someone exhaling in short tight bursts. Now every night I brace myself for those sighs that make my skin crawl. I wake up around the 3rd of August almost every day. At first I thought it was my own imagination. I'd roll over in bed and try to ignore the noise, but it happened more often. I'd lie there, my eyes open, my heart pounding, listening. The closet would give off this muffled sound like a person behind a wall. I'd try to move slowly, hoping that maybe it was just the air conditioner or some draft. Sometimes I'd sit up, switch on the lamp beside my bed and stare at those doors. My bedroom is small, so the closet is only a couple of feet away from the foot of my bed. I can't avoid looking at it. I remember the first night it really scared me. It was hot outside and I had the window cracked open. The air was thick. Around 2:45 a.m. I heard a faint sigh. It made me freeze for a second. My pulse jumped and my mouth went dry. I thought maybe I was dreaming, so I rubbed my eyes and got out of bed. I walked across the room, stood in front of the closet and tried to listen. Nothing. I decided to open the door just to check. As I slid it open, I felt a cold rush of air. The inside was dark, just a row of clothes and a couple of boxes. My eyes adjusted, but there was nothing inside except my stuff. I pushed the clothes aside. No spaces, no cracks, nothing unusual. I told myself I was overthinking it. I closed the closet and went back to bed, but 10 minutes later there was another sigh. It wasn't loud, but it had a strange rhythm, like a person letting out a slow breath. My arms broke out in goosebumps and I felt sweat gathering at the back of my neck. I muttered a few curses under my breath and forced myself to stay put. I focused on my breathing, trying to calm down. Eventually I fell asleep. In the morning I shrugged it off. I even laughed about it in the shower, telling myself it was just the wood or something random, but then it became a nightly thing. Over the next week I heard the same noise at least 5 times. Sometimes it was a low moan, sometimes it sounded more like a hiss. I never heard it when I was wide awake in the daytime. It was always in the early hours, sometime between midnight and 3 a.m. I tried different things. I turned on a small fan thinking maybe the air circulation was making the closet would move differently. No change. I checked the hinges, though it's a built-in closet with sliding doors, so there aren't normal hinges like a regular door. I tightened every screw I could find, even sprayed WD-40 on the tracks. Still the noises continued. One night I decided to record the sounds. I placed my phone on a shelf near the bed and set it to record audio. I figured I'd get proof of the strange moaning and then figure out a rational explanation. I went to sleep, or at least I tried. I was restless. My mind kept drifting to the closet doors. At around 2:20 a.m. I jolted awake when I heard a creak, then a sigh. I grabbed my phone, stopped the recording, and listened to the playback. It mostly captured my own breathing and the soft hum of the fan. Then around the 2-hour mark there was something that sounded like a low exhale, lasting maybe 2 seconds. It was faint, but it was there. That made my stomach tighten. I'm not superstitious, but it unsettled me. The next day I took apart the closet's interior panels. I removed my clothes, pulled out all the boxes, and checked every corner. I looked for holes, hidden compartments, anything that could be letting in air or causing some weird draft. I found nothing. It was all solid with plaster and a bit of insulation behind it. I felt real relief and frustration at the same time. I put everything back, trying to keep my mind off it. That evening I tried to stay up late, hoping I'd hear the noise. While fully awake I sat at my desk with a cup of coffee, playing mindless videos in the background to keep me alert. Midnight rolled around. Nothing. By 1 a.m. I was yawning and my eyes were watering from staring at my computer screen. At 2 a.m. I thought about giving up. Then around 3:30 a.m. I heard it. It was louder than usual, like someone letting out a throaty moan. I jumped out of my chair so fast that I almost knocked it over. My heart was hammering in my chest. I hit the desk lamp, flooding the room with light, and rushed to the closet. I slid the door open in one quick motion. Inside it was just the same emptiness and darkness. No movement, no person, no animal. I stood there breathing heavily, feeling sweat slide down my forehead. I reached inside, feeling around for a draft. My hand touched the back panel, which felt cold. The hair on my arm stood up. I searched again for any kind of opening. Nothing. I couldn't even find a loose nail. I stepped back, left the door open, and sat on the edge of my bed. I watched the closet for at least half an hour, barely blinking. No more sounds came. I started losing sleep. Every night the pattern repeated. Sometimes it was a sigh, sometimes it was a prolonged moan. It never went on for too long, maybe once or twice a night, and then it stopped. During the day I thought about it non-stop. I searched Online for possibilities, I found plenty of supernatural stories, but I didn't want to go down that path. I wanted a logical explanation, something like thermal expansion or an HVC issue, but the more I read research, the more I realized that normal creaking doesn't sound like a human moan, and it definitely doesn't come with those quiet, breathy pauses. I decided to talk to my friend Marcus about it. He's usually the calm type, the guy who loves a good puzzle. We grabbed a couple of beers one afternoon and I told him about the noises. He looked at me with a mix of curiosity and concern. He asked if I was sure there wasn't an animal stuck behind the wall. I admitted I wasn't entirely sure, so that day we went back to my place, pried open a section of the drywall behind the closet and used a flashlight to see if there were any nests or holes. It was all empty. We patched it up, shook our heads and decided to let it be that night. I felt a little more at ease, thinking that maybe the problem was fixed or that we disturbed whatever was causing it, but around 1:30 a.m. the sigh came again. I felt a jolt in my stomach. I broke into a sweat. I cursed under my breath and grabbed my phone to record once more. I turned on the flashlight and walked to the closet. I paused right in front of it. I could hear my own breathing. Then I heard it again, a short moan. It sounded close, maybe inches behind the door. My fingers felt numb and I could feel my heart racing in my throat. I slid the door open and aimed my phone's light inside. Nothing. I stuck my head in and scanned the walls, just clothes hanging on the rod, a box with old shoes and some dust on the floor. My breath was unsteady and my chest felt tight. I backed away, left the door open and sat down. I tried to calm myself, but my mind was spinning. Over the next few days I kept going through the same cycle. I'd dread the night, wait for the sound, jump out of bed and find nothing. I started sleeping with a small lamp on because I couldn't stand complete darkness anymore. I felt embarrassed about it, but I couldn't handle the pitch black room. The moans persisted. Some nights I'd almost convinced myself I hadn't heard anything. Then I'd notice that my arms were covered in goosebumps or my heart was still pumping fast, and I'd realize I definitely heard it. One evening I tried staying in the living room until I was so tired I could barely keep my eyes open. I thought if I crashed on the couch maybe I wouldn't hear it, but around 2 a.m. I heard the same moan in the distance. It came from the direction of my bedroom. My adrenaline spiked and I felt a cold sweat on my palms. I stayed on the couch trying to ignore it, but then it happened again, a little louder. I jumped up, walked down the hallway and peeked into my room. The closet was shut. Everything looked normal, but I felt this heavy sense of dread. I left all the lights on that night and barely slept. I tried inviting a friend to stay over, but he declined after hearing me ramble about weird closet noises. Nobody wanted to join me in that. Marcus offered to sleep on the couch one night, though he arrived with a sleeping bag and some beers. I felt relieved. Having someone else in the apartment made me calmer. We talked for a while, watched a movie and then turned off the TV around 1 a.m. He stayed on the couch. I went to my bedroom, left the door open so I could shout if I heard anything. An hour passed. I was drifting in and out of sleep. Then I heard a muffled sigh. It was softer than usual, but I recognized it immediately. I got up, hurried to the living room and asked Marcus if he heard it. He looked half asleep and said he thought he heard something, but he wasn't sure. We both went to the closet together, turned on every light. He yanked the doors open, rummaged through my clothes. He banged on the walls, pressed his ear against them. Nothing. After a while he shrugged and said maybe my mind was playing tricks on me. He ended up leaving the next morning looking just as confused as I was I tried to get back to a normal routine, but my nights never felt peaceful again. I jolt awake at any slight noise, even the air conditioner clicking on made me tense up. My appetite suffered. I kept the curtains drawn during the day, avoiding direct sunlight in the bedroom because somehow I felt better keeping the space in a steady dim light. I kept checking the closet at random times, hoping to catch it in the ACT during daylight hours. It never made a sound when the sun was out. I thought about moving, but it felt ridiculous to plan a move over a noise. I tried ignoring it for a while, just forcing myself not to react, but that low moan lingered in my head every time I closed my eyes. Some nights were quiet and I'd almost think it was over. Then right before dawn I'd hear a soft exhale. I'd sit up straight, my heart thumping in my ears, staring at that built-in closet. It always felt like the sound was just beyond the door, like a person pressing their mouth against the wood and letting out a breath. One night I got really frustrated. I yanked the closet door off its track entirely. I placed it against the wall. There was no longer a barrier, just an open closet. I turned on the overhead light so I could see the entire interior. Then I sat on my bed, arms crossed, waiting. I thought that might do the trick, maybe remove the possibility of the door itself creaking. Hours passed. Eventually I dozed off. Then in a half-asleep state I heard it again, a faint moan. My eyes shot open. The closet door wasn't even in place. I looked at the empty closet space. Everything was in plain sight. Nothing moved. I felt goosebumps all over. My breathing got shallow. I rubbed my eyes trying to see if there was any shadow or shape. There was only darkness inside. I stood up, aimed my phone flashlight around. The closet was empty, wide open. Still I heard it. That was the moment I realized I couldn't deny it anymore. The next day I told Marcus I was done trying to fix this on my own. We agreed that maybe it was best if I found a new place and left this problem behind. Like and subscribe for 4